Destination management, broad-based benefits, effective marketing, visitor experience, and facilitation of ease of access. These were all the ingredients we had to work with in the makings to have 21 million tourists by 2030. Then coronavirus hit. Who would have thought that we would be here? Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for this Tourism Recovery Plan webinar. My name is Tami Ngadimeng, and I'll be your moderator for today, helping steer the conversation. On the 15th of March, our president announced the national state of disaster. It altered all aspects of life and the economy. In fact, one of the very first sectors to be hit was the tourism industry itself. There had to be travel restrictions in order to curb this virus from spreading in our country, leaving thousands of businesses and jobs at risk. Earlier on this year, there was a survey conducted on the impact of COVID-19 on the tourism industry, conducted by the International Finance Corporation in collaboration with Department of Tourism and Tourism Business Council of South Africa. They found that 95% of the people who were interviewed said that the enterprise got more than 50% less revenue in May 2020 this year, as opposed to May 2019. Despite these challenges that the pandemic has brought upon our sector, the Department of Tourism and South African Tourism, in partner with the sector, have embarked in developing the tourism sector plan to resume operations within the sector as early as it is safe to do so. Today's webinar is to further engage you as our esteemed stakeholders within this sector, and to further explain and give an update of the current status of the tourism sector recovery plan and the risk-adjusted strategy. Every ship, however, has a captain, and I will shortly hand over to our captain of our ship, who is the Honorable Minister, Memamoloko Kubai Ngubane. But I would also like to acknowledge also the Honorable Deputy Minister of Tourism, Fish Mahlalela, who will speak to us a little bit further on. But before I hand over to the Minister, I'd like you to join me in please congratulating her. She has just accepted an invitation to become a member of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Sustainable Tourism. I now hand over to you, Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Tammy. It took a bit of a long time. I was waiting for the host to allow me to unmute. Thanks for the congratulatory message. Indeed, it is an honor to serve at global platforms. And especially, I was looking forward to my end of term as a council member in the Artificial Intelligence Council this year in September. So I am looking forward to being part of the Council on Sustainable Tourism. Starting October this year, I received the nomination from Prof. Schwab, requesting me to join amongst other global leaders as part of what we need to do in looking at how to rebuild the tourism sector globally, but also make sure that it is sustainable. Let me acknowledge the Deputy Minister of Tourism, Mr. Fish Mahlalela, Mr. Mduduzi Mbongwa, Deputy Secretary General of SACAU, Mr. Chifiwa Chifengwa, CEO TBCSA, Ms. Vivian Pearson, CEO of South African Insurance Association, Mr. Tebogo Maruping, UIF Commissioner, Ms. Nina Fraser-Pretorius, CEO of the Conference Companies, Mr. Nhlanhla Ndlovu, CEO of Netle Community Trust, Mr. Khulekani Mathe, Senior General Manager, Banking Association of South Africa, our DDG and National Treasury who will be joining us, Mamwet will be joining us. He's been one of our DDGs, acknowledging the DDGs. I'm acknowledging him ahead of other seniors to him because he's a panel member, so I'm not breaking protocol. I hope colleagues understand. Ishmael Moniat, who has been in the Treasury for years, is the Director General responsible for tax, financial sector policy, and policy in government. Acknowledging members of the South African Tourism Board who have joined us, together with the CEO and other executives, the Director General of the Department of Tourism, together with other DDGs. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. And those who are following us on our social media platforms, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Let me first take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this Tourism Sector Recovery Plan webinar this morning. Also reminding that we issued the recovery plan document in my last media briefing for consultation, is currently in consultation, and hoping many of us are submitting our comments. We have received so far quite a number of comments, and we are still urging those who haven't submitted. The closing date is tomorrow. Let me also pay a special tribute to all the women who have joined us for this webinar. And to you all, I say Happy Women's Month, and hope you are enjoying this month, but also we are making sure that we're doing our bit in ensuring that our sector becomes a truly area where women can be part of, but also generally dealing with issues that affects women in our society, in our country, and globally. Indeed, one of the devastating things that COVID-19 outbreak has exposed the vulnerability of women in the economy. This is because majority of women who are economically active are in the service sector. And this is the sector that has been hard hit by the pandemic. The tourism sector is one such sector that has been devastated. The International Labour Organization estimates that women account for between 60 and 70% of the global tourism labor force. Sadly, women's work in the tourism is dominated by informality through high staff turnover, long working hours, subcontracting, flexible working condition, the prevalence of casual workers, and seasonal variations in employment. Concentrated as they are in this vulnerable position in the sector, it is easy to see why women are the largest casualty of the constrained business environment. It is quite evident that part of what we need to focus on in our discussion of the tourism sector recovery plan is the issue of gender equality. The issue of gender mainstreaming needs to find expression in our plan so that the recovery can be gender inclusive. And not only just gender inclusive, we can afford the women in our sector the respect that they deserve. For the past 3 months, the situation globally and here at home has been highly uncertain. And it remains uncertain, though there are signs that the rate of infection is stabilizing. The pandemic has been devastating for the tourism sector. And thus far, it has forced closure of many small and medium businesses, slashed a huge percentage of income for the businesses that continue to operate, and it has also put many jobs at risk. Over this period, government and the stakeholders in the tourism sector have been working closely together to try and find some ways to operate in the midst of the pandemics. We've held various stakeholder meetings over online, virtual, either with many subsectors or even individuals who have reached out to the ministry and to the department, requesting a hearing from us, or also those who have written to us, providing suggestions, inputs in what we can be able to do to assist, working hand in hand, to be able to put a commendable case, to put a compelling case for the sector to start operating. Step by step, as I said last time, that we take one step at a time, but sometimes the steps, yes, are not enough, are not big steps enough. Some of them have become smaller steps and others have become a bit giant steps. But we have been marching towards the total reopening of the sector, mindful of the fact that we need to manage the risk to people's lives and their lives. This is in the issue and what President had said, the delicate balancing of lives and livelihoods. The pace at which the subsectors have been opening might not be ideal for many businesses whose income has been devastated by the impact, because as government, as we perform this job of opening, that balancing of lives and livelihood has been something that we never even anticipated, something that is in the areas of uncharted waters, but in a situation that is unprecedented, uncertain, and serious health risk. Constrained by fiscal limitations, government could not bail out the sector, although it provided other relief mechanisms. Many businesses have either at risk of permanent closure or already closed permanently. Perhaps an issue that might need us to discuss is what is it that we should do as a sector going forward to ensure that we prepare financially for the type of crisis that we are currently experiencing. Quite a number of people are submitting and are raising a whole range of things, issues around where we need to find the money, or even suggestion of saying, how do we contribute, either in terms of levies, either in terms of taxes, or what do we put in place for those rainy days, as we have learned now as a tourism sector, that we've reached rainy days and we had nothing that we had saved to caution us during these rainy days. The situation is stabilizing, as I have already mentioned, and I think it is an opportune time for us to be having this discussion on the tourism sector recovery plan. Over the past 3 months and in consultation with various stakeholders, as I mentioned, we started working on the draft plan, which we released for public comments on the 1st of August. We firmly believe that tourism will be one of the fastest growing sectors in the recovery period. It will be one of the key sectors that will drive the overall economic recovery. The plan is a roadmap that will help us achieve this level of growth. The plan is anchored on 3 pillars, which include protecting and rejuvenating supply, focusing on business continuity risks, aligning the value chain to new biosecurity standards, preserving air access, as well as investment, facilitation, and market access. Reigniting demand. This will require a robust domestic marketing strategy, the agility to respond decisively to an uncertain global environment, and responsiveness to changes in consumer preference. Strengthening enabling capabilities, implementing mechanisms to increase ease of travel through activities such as piloting and rolling out of proposed e-visa systems to simplify the visa and entry processes. We believe that activities centered on these 3 pillars are what will put the tourism sector on the road to recovery and get many South Africans to get back to work and be able to earn a living and save their businesses. To come with practical and innovative set of activities that we can all rally behind requires all of us to make a contribution. And this I continue every time to say, we have to work as partners. The document also proposes 10 strategic recommendations, along with specific actions, timeframes, and accountabilities. The recommendations are centered on 3 themes I've outlined, and I will highlight some of the recommendations. The first one is to conclude a comprehensive industry-government recovery partnership to collaborate on all aspects of tourism recovery, guided by this recovery plan. Introduce national norms and standards for safe tourism operations inspired by globally recognized biosecurity protocols across the value chain to enable safe travel and rebuilding traveler confidence. Continue to work with the sister departments to build on the work already done to increase ease of access into South Africa for the purpose of stimulating the tourism. Continue to intensify work on tourism safety using our safety monitors program and partnership with the police and relevant stakeholders. Finalize the introduction of the e-visa program for priority markets and ensure effectiveness in the licensing of the tour operators. Number 4, catalyze domestic demand through the phases of economic reopening with informative and inspirational messaging that encourages safe tourism and domestic vacation experience. Execute a global marketing and travel trade program targeted at the highest potential source markets in terms of volume and value, and ensure that travel consumer segments are interpreted to reignite international demand. Launch an investment and market entry facilitation program to stimulate capital investment, sector transformation, and product diversification. We plan to go on an investment drive in which we will leverage some of the resources we have to crowd in private sector investment. The programs such as the Tourism Equity Fund will be re-engineered to drive investments in the sector, which will go a long way towards protecting the supply side of the tourism sector. Just to indicate, our team in the department that works in the investment pipelines are indicating to us that there's quite a lot of interest from various investors to invest in the tourism sector in South Africa. Prioritize cooperation with neighboring destinations towards a regional value proposition and a seamless visitor experience through contributing the implementation of the SADC tourism strategy. With all this, noting that as we look and we listen to Minister of Health, we did get the indication that much of what we have been able to fear, the pandemic, the surge, we are starting to see the easing of the pressure in terms of our hospitals. We are starting to see the number of new infections per day coming down, and this, as per the risk-adjusted strategy model, will actually assist us to be able to see more and more activities coming if this trend continues. I do believe that government will continue to assess and respond as per the commitment that have been made to say, when the risk is higher, the regulations and the environment and the protocols will be stringent. When the risk is low, the protocols and the regulations, the stringency will be lowered. So those will be lowered, and we do actually appreciate the support of South Africans, including our sector, to be able to work hand in hand with government and understanding that it's something that we do not know. It's something that we've been trying to figure out, but we even are learning in the process. But the patience of South Africans, including in this sector, is highly appreciated. And from government, we do not take this for granted. We do understand that it came at a high cost for many of us in terms of losing our businesses. Some, it came at high cost for many of us, including losing our jobs. As we work towards this recovery, we will do our best as the department to rebuild the sector, to even surpass where it was prior to COVID-19. I must emphasize that the recommendations outlined in the document are not cast in stone. I've outlined them to stimulate the discussion, and I'm confident that the discussions today and the submissions that we have been receiving will help us to have a more enriching final document to present to Cabinet. Indeed, scientists are telling us that there might be a post-COVID period. There might never be a post-COVID period. So the intention for us is to be able to start learning to live with the virus. And I do believe that as we work together, we'll be able to weather the storm. If we went hand in hand, we'll be able to see the resilience of tourism sector. And as many are saying, including those when I interacted with them in the World Economic Forum, who are giving us to say they do see a positive outlook for South Africa's tourism industry. And one of the reasons why I was asked to come and join so that we can share the work that we are doing, what we have been able to do, and what we have been able to achieve. So with those few words, ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking forward to the conversations today and feedback from you as the stakeholders and as participants in the tourism sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Indeed, we will surpass, I believe. So how we're going to steer the conversation for today is we'll start with the first panel and we are going to reflect. It is important for us to consciously look back and change and take note of the things that we need to change in order to go forward. Then post the first panel, then we will go into the heat and the thick of the conversation. And then after that, we will dive into the way forward. So for the first panel, I do have the CEO of TVCSA, Chifiwa Chivengwa. I have the Deputy General Secretary from SACAWU, which is the South African Commercial Catering and Allied Workers Union, Mduduzi Mbongwe. And I have the CEO of Nedleg Community Trust, Nhlanhla Ndlovu. I'm going to start off with you, Chifiwa. Perhaps you can give us an overview on how the impact of the COVID-19 has been on the sector, but also what the role of TVCSA has been in helping the sector through recovery.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and good morning, Minister. Good morning, Deputy Minister, colleagues from various departments, from South African Tourism, and indeed the colleagues from the industry that are listening from across the breadth of our country. You know, I know that it's been 140 days since, well, this is the 140th day of lockdown. And I was just looking at my numbers, and if I loosely translate it, it equates to about, you know, a spend of about 104 billion rand that we have potentially lost or have lost because tourism activities have been, you know, very minimal during the lockdown, and mostly, you know, non-existent, you know, across, you know, the leisure industry. And it is indeed a situation that has devastated the industry. It is a situation that has devastated the employees within the industry. If you look at the number of people that are now sitting on UIF, you've got around 600,000 people that are directly employed in tourism that are, you know, receiving UIF as we speak. And we all know that the UIF is going to end on the 15th of this month. And it means that if nothing is put onto the table, there will be a continued devastation in terms of job losses. And if you look at, you know, the number of companies that are retrenching and the levels of retrenching that we have seen within the sector, my discussions with many different companies that between 50 and 80% of the staff, you know, is going to be retrenched as companies try to resize to fit the demand that currently exists. Which simply means that you're going to have a lot of people, you know, sitting at home without anything to do. So it is a devastating situation. We are losing employees that we love dearly. We are losing a lot of young people that have just entered the industry. and we're dashing the hopes of those young people that have just graduated, trying to come into the industry and looking for employment. So it is a situation that's dire. It's a situation that, when I receive a call from a young person who's sitting in Hazy View, who's faced with a choice of, either being retrenched or a choice of, staying employed without receiving any income. It is one of those conversations that one, when you listen, you can't help but, to feel sad about the situation. But we are where we are. The pandemic is here. It is with us as we speak. And I'm glad the minister have talked about the fact that we need to learn to live with this pandemic, because it may be here for the foreseeable future. So we need to adapt, we need to readjust, and we need to make sure that we return back to business. Now, if you look at the recovery of the sector, as a private sector, especially from us representing the TBCSA, and also some of the members that are not part of the TBCSA, that subscribe to the fact that we need to reopen the sector. It has been our rallying call to government, and indeed working with the minister, and indeed working with the DG at the department and many other colleagues from the department, to say we need to look at reopening the sector in a responsible way, and in a way that will make sure that our clients are protected, our suppliers are protected, and most importantly, the employees are protected. And that is why we embarked as a TBCSA, and together with the industry colleagues and industry association, we developed the protocols that ensures that we go back to work in a safe way. And these protocols are there for everyone to use. We are working on making sure that we digitalize them. We're making sure that we get this across the breadth of our country, in every establishment, be it rural area, be it in the village, or be it in the suburbs. We need to make sure that we comply. We need to make sure that we apply these protocols to mitigate the spread of the virus. We have done so. We'll continue to do so as a private sector, and we'll continue to improve as we learn new information to ensure that we are ahead of the curve. One thing that we want, and we know that is gonna open up and give hope to the industry and get more people going back to work, is the fact of interprovincial travel, or opening up domestic travel in its full sense. And of course, we wouldn't want to do that in an irresponsible way. We will do so in a responsible way, ensuring that protocols are followed. It's not a small task. It is a big task, and we need all of us from the industry, both private and public sector, to work together to make sure that this is a reality. So we have done those things to ensure that we can return back to work. I've always said that in many of the discussion we've had, that recovery begins when one employee goes back to their job, when they sit behind their desk, when they go to that lodge, when they go to that attraction, or when they go to that conference. That's when the recovery starts, because they are able to put something on the table at home. So it is very important that, when we do the recovery, we look at it in the eyes of those that work within the sector. I do believe that, from the profit side of things, we are not going to break even this year, let alone next year. It's going to be tough, but we have to be resilient, as we've always been. But we need to get the wheels of the value chain to start moving, so that we can start to see, some action within, the tourism sector. So that is very important, for us, that, we get the full domestic working. Another thing that's very important as part of the recovery is to put down a date for when we're going to be getting international travel, going again. I've had many discussions with the industry colleagues that are involved on inbound, in aviation, that are tour operators, both here at home and internationally, who have many clients that are ready, to visit the country. We need to, at some point in the near future, decide when, we're going to be opening our international borders. And if so, are there conditions attached to opening international borders? And if so, what is it that we can do as a private sector to meet those conditions, to ensure that we go back to some level of business activity in that space? We are ready as a sector to open up. We are ready to implement the protocols. We are ready, to welcome the guest. This is what we do best, tourism is delivered by the private sector. We are the one who gets the clients from overseas, from here at home. We get them into our vehicles, we drive them to wherever we drive them, we make sure they enjoy their experiences, and in that process, we earn an income. And we make sure that we, employ as many people as we can, and we make sure that, we spread, the love of tourism across the board. So for us as a private sector, this has been a devastating situation. A lot of jobs have been lost already. Our impact on the economy is probably going to be halved. We are already sitting on more than 100 billion rand lost, in 2020 compared to 2018. We know that we need to get on with the protocols and ensure that they are implemented. We know we need to get more airlines to be looking at South Africa so that we can recover properly. We know that there's going to be an issue of trust in terms of people trying to come to South Africa. Trust is going to be the next currency, and that's why protocols are quite important, and that's why we're moving ahead to make sure that we are a trusted destination where people can come. We're doing all this to impact the economy. We're doing all this to make sure that people go back to work. We're doing all this to make sure that the 1.5 million jobs that are supported by tourism are protected and people can come back to work. We do this being mindful that there's still work that needs to be done within the sector. We need to transform. We know that we need to deal with issues around transformation within the sector. We know that we need to deal with issues of ensuring that there are new products across the board, and there's a spread of tourism across provinces. And it is the work that is ahead of us. And indeed, together, joining hands, we should be able to work together, and we should be able to hunt as a pack so that we can achieve the results that we all seek. It is our destination. We are passionate about it. Some of us have grown up in this industry. There's nothing else we know. And we need to go back to some level of normalcy. We need to open domestic tourism. We need to set a date for international inbound. We need to make sure that we get those conferences that have earmarked to come to South Africa. It is the time that we make this decision and we move on. And I would like to thank the minister for again, stating that this pandemic is probably going to be with us for quite some time. We need to adapt, we need to adjust, we need to be agile, and then we need to ensure that in whatever we do, we are safe and we protect our staff first and foremost, and make sure that the entire value chain is protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chifiwa. Before I move on to Mduduzi, I just want to remind everybody that we do have a chat facility that is available where you can post your questions, and we'll endeavor to answer as many questions as possible before the session is done. So we will have Q&As after every panel. But in the spirit of hunting together as a pack, as Chifiwa said, I will please ask that you stick to the topics of today in the questions that you ask, and that we just ask the questions with a tonality of collaboration and wanting to work together. With that, I hand over to you, Mduduzi Mbongwe, and I'd like to ask you, I mean, there's no doubt jobs have been lost and there's an impact through this COVID-19 on the labor sector. Can you touch a little bit on that and how organized labor is contributing towards the fight against coronavirus?
Thank you, Program Director. We also acknowledge the presence of the Minister and the Deputy Minister, as well as the DG, and thank them for their support during this difficult period. We have had some interaction at that level, and we thank them for the support. Firstly, on the impact of both the virus and some of the regulations on the sector is that it has had a devastating impact. Even now, whilst restaurants are open, some don't operate. We don't know whether they have taken a decision to stop operating as a result of some of the requirements or not, but it's in our interest to rebuild tourism as a sector, because it contributes to job creation within the country, and it has been the engine of growth of the South African economy, even during the darkest period. So we can't afford to lose tourism as a sector. That's our point of departure as a union. We also have seen that some of the regulations limit social dialogue in the sense that they restrict our ability to move and be in contact with members. We have been participating in measures aimed at ensuring that we stop the spread of the virus or we reduce it at least. We are fully committed to that process as a union. But however, there are these restrictions which have impacted negatively on our ability to do our work. For an example, if you have to deal with retrenchments as a union which organizes in all provinces within the country, we need to ensure that there is some representation of each province. But at times we are told by the CCMA that they can only accept 5 people from the union. If we have got 9 provinces, surely it does create problems for us to coordinate our input and our response. At times that leads to unprotected strikes as a result of poor coordination imposed by some of the regulations that we have. But we don't want to complain about the past. We are looking forward to what we regard as a just recovery, a recovery which seeks to benefit all role players in the sector, including women. We salute the minister for ensuring that this webinar represents women, because they are the majority in the country and in the sector as well. Some of the proposals that we have going forward is that we think we are in general support of the strategic recommendations contained in the document. On the first one, we believe that the partnership should not be restricted to government and business. We have a role to play as a union. Perhaps the community also has a role, because we have realized that communities at times don't appreciate local tourism. For example, in Gauteng, there are so many tourist attractions, but people will be interested in going to Durban rather than utilizing the facilities at their disposal. There are quite a lot. So that involvement of communities will be important. The second point is that on domestic tourism, we support the proposal to lift those restrictions on interprovincial travel. It doesn't make sense. For an example, if you are in the Vaal, Free State is very close to you. Some people in the Vaal shop in Sasolburg, and Sasolburg is viewed as part of Free State, which is another province. We don't think it's still relevant to maintain those restrictions on traveling between provinces. The other point that we have, we don't think we should compromise transformation of the sector. And things like your skills development, for an example, those tour guides, you may use this period to upskill them, reskill them for future opportunities that may arise. The other priority is to ensure that there is proper enterprise development during this period. For an example, those that might not be able to survive might need to be mentored by big players in this sector. And we've also realized that there is a lot of franchising in this sector. We want to challenge those franchisors to play their role in building the small players in the sector. First, lastly, on the issue of contribution of labor has already contributed. The TES, for an example, belongs to the unemployment insurance fund, and those funds belong to workers. But we couldn't allow more retrenchments. That's why a decision was taken that some of the reserves should be used to ensure that people earn a living whilst we are having this challenge. And we thank the department for giving us the platform to share our concerns and views. And we want to ensure that consultation and partnership is an ongoing process rather than a once-off event. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Duduzi, for that. We now move on to you, CEO of Nedlac Community Trust, Nhlanhla Ndlovu, to just touch on the impact that COVID-19 has had on South African citizens and the work that's been done by the Nedlac community constituencies for this fight against the coronavirus.
Thank you, Program Director, and thanks to the Minister, Deputy Minister and DG for convening this session. Now, as a community constituency, I think at a time when COVID happened, there were already like processes that the Minister and the DG had begun, which were about stepping up the efforts of transformation in the tourism sector. That includes community, and as the Minister was saying, there is a focus on women, and part of our constituency is women. Now, the COVID-19 has basically put paid to some of the processes that had been set in place, which were about ensuring that we increase the participation of women in the tourism sector. But also we have got a huge youth sector. Over the years, some of the young people have participated as Chief Iwa was indicating. They are role players, they are training in institutions of higher learning and in post-school education. They are gaining skills in various elements of the value chain of tourism, including but not limited to tour guiding, as well as other elements of the value chain. The COVID-19 has then impacted quite negatively on the community efforts on tourism. In 2018, when we had a job summit, there are a number of community proposals that came, and actually like commitments of the job summit that have got to do with tourism. And these basically are actually aimed at driving a massive transformation agenda. We accept, for instance, that tourism, the current impacts are felt most by the private sector, because the private sector has been already playing in that space. It's also felt by labor because there's a lot of jobs that have been lost. But in terms of how we have been positioning tourism, and even the measures that we have been putting in place, like the Minister was mentioning the e-visa issue, as well as the issue of unabridged birth certificates. By the end of last year, we had already corrected for some of these issues, with an intention that we're going to basically leverage tourism because of the potential that it has on creating jobs. And we must also remember what Labour is saying in what Mduduzi is saying. Our people, I don't know if we are paying adequate attention to this, that people in villages and townships, up to 70% of the populations in townships, you find that they don't do leisure travel. They actually don't leave their places. You could be talking about a person living in Soweto. Those who are not moving out because of employment and so on, there is a great majority of people who never do leisure travel. And this basically applies in every other community across the country, be it in all the 9 provinces. That basically is a big potential. And in fact, part of the propositions that we had around the job summit was about just fostering that very same local travel, where you could even be having travel that is supported by homestay. A person moving from Gauteng and ending up in Durban, not necessarily using expensive facilities like hotels, but just also having homestays. And this was already, we were beginning to coordinate these type of efforts so that we actually make tourism affordable to people who are not earning a lot. And we are also like supporting cooperatives, which are part of our constituency, to make sure that they develop the packages that enable like the low-income earners to be able to travel for leisure across the provinces. So what we are saying is that we are supporting the measures that are being put in place and the protocols. And we are also supporting the idea that there has to be a gradual opening, in particular with like interprovincial travel, as well as leisure travel within the country, and also like a move towards saying what would be the date for the international travel to open up. At the same time, then there's things that we are, the president has been in constant conversations with us through Network and other platforms. And there's a clear indication from the president, and this applies across the board. There is a call for transformation. And this call for transformation must not just go unheard and nothing being done about it. So as far as we are concerned, then as community constituency, there's things that we want to see, and actually Labour has already begun to speak to them. There is a window of opportunity that is presented by lack of massive activity in the sector, of fostering transformation by one, basically transferring the skills, because ordinarily it's difficult for established private sector businesses to do work when they are actually busy with their work. For instance, if when the economy is open and things are as per normal, you cannot find like leaders in tourism transferring skills to young people, transferring skills to women. So this is a window of opportunity that we must not miss. It's a window of opportunity where we must then like take this time and then do what we could do to transfer like skills that are existing already in the private sector to those who are aspirants and startups in the sector. But there's also things that we have already begun to do. Like in communities that we have, there's various attractions that have not been developed properly into tourism attractions. And during this period, where if we are very serious about transformation, these are the things that we must begin to do and ensure that the participation, first on just a racial basis, that will transform the sector so that there is actually a lot of participation of Black people and in Black communities. But secondly, we just don't talk about the participation of women, but we do whatever it will take for the participation of women, not at entry level only, but also in ownership of facilities, in development of the value chain, the same with young people, the same with people with disabilities. So we are actually seeing this as an opportunity for all of us to reset the agenda on tourism. And obviously, as everybody knows, that there's going to be a very long period, there's going to be gradual opening, but there's things that we could be doing collectively. And as the minister was speaking about concluding the partnership between the private sector and the government, including also the other sister departments, there has to be also a clear focus, an intentional focus on the participation of communities, because when we talk transformation, and we have also like across the board, within agriculture and everywhere else, we have come to conclude as a community that the work that we are doing is also in the value chain. We actually get people to participate, and then like the private sector takes over. So you will have an individual citizen who currently wishes to participate in tourism. By our interventions, when we are making sure that they're getting skilled, they're getting mentored, they are actually given financial opportunities, and then they are supported. Those then graduate because they are not just going to remain in the community sector, but they move up to become members of private sector institutions, be it in tourism, be it in agriculture, and so on and so forth. So the truth is that we are dealing with an economy, even without COVID, which was not as inclusive. And we cannot say we are resetting, but continue with an exclusionary process that basically doesn't take into account the fact that there's so much latent potential across the board in all 9 provinces on things that we could do and scale up to improve tourism. So this is an opportunity that we are also being given. So whilst we are supporting the economic recovery in terms of the established businesses, as well as activities in parastatals like your aviation and so on and so forth. We are then saying that let's not lose sight and actually miss this good opportunity. This is a good crisis for us to begin to step up the support to startups, to SMEs, as well as development of tourism across all the 52 districts of the country in such a way that, so when we are saying we are surpassing where we were before the lockdown, it is these things that we shall be doing that will make sure that tourism is no longer the same. We are actually talking about a more inclusive tourism industry, but a tourism industry that also supports leisure travel of the most vulnerable and poor. There's nothing that stops people from villages to experience a sea, to experience inland experiences from those who come from the coast. These are the things that we could support. And in fact, we, as a community constituency, we're saying that there's been a demise, actually a complete death of some of the movements. They were, during apartheid days, you will have school tours where maybe a child from Durban is going to Bophuthatswana through a school tour. These things are no longer happening, and we could support school tours and community tourism in that sense. And we are feeling that then this is an opportunity as we reset and as we recover the tourism sector to do these things and support them during this period of this year and next year to build up a better tourism industry. So we're hoping that we are not just going to bemoan the losses that we have encountered, but we are actually seeing an opportunity in crisis, and we actually do whatever it takes to leverage this opportunity in crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ndlovu. We will now open up for questions, and we've received quite a few. We obviously won't get to all of them, so please be on standby, Chifiwa, Mduduzi, and Nhlanhla. I will ask the first question to you, Chifiwa. It's been written, how is TVCSA going to work with youth in tourism and informal sectors in a consultative process that does not leave anybody out?
Thank you very much, Tammy. As the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, we've been working with everyone, whether they're a member of Tourism Business Council or not a member, and whether they're coming, through associations from rural area or coming from urban areas or wherever they come from. We've been open, especially in this time of crisis, so that we can reach everyone across the country and we can reach all stakeholders across the countries to make sure that we understand the impact of COVID-19, as well as looking for solutions, to deal with the issues around the impact of COVID-19. So, the issues around consultation, we are open to talk. People know where to find us through our website. You can call myself directly. And we can deal with those issues. I think it's quite important that, everyone along the value chain, everyone along the employment chain is consulted, understand what we're doing from the industry point of view, and participate in what we're doing from the industry point of view, because these things are quite important. Now, we have, as an example, gone through the process of consultation on protocols, where, we spoke to everyone regarding, how do we ensure that we de-risk the sector. And we went through the breadth of this country to figure out how do we ensure that this is done in a broader way, in a participative way. And we've held many webinars to deal with that. So, on all those webinars, were done in a way that anyone can participate. So we've been open to everyone to come in. It's important that we do that. And also in doing so, it's important that in implementation of these protocols, we do so in a very inclusive way, because implementation can only be done by us. And it can only be done by us working collectively from the private sector and the public sector. And we have to do so working with local municipalities. We have to do so working with the tourism authorities in each province. We have to do so working with everyone along the associations to make sure that we implement the protocols. The implementation of the protocols goes squarely into what the survival of this sector. We don't want a situation whereby as soon as we open, there is an outbreak at a certain location, and then we have to close a certain location. We cannot afford at this time to open, close, open, close. We've already been hit hard, and there are way too many people that are outside, that are not employed, that are outside of employment, that needs to come back. And if businesses go into open, close, it's not going to be a good situation. So the implementation and the collaborativeness, goes with all of us. We have to work together to make sure that this industry works. We have to work together to make sure that whatever we're putting down now, it's sustainable and it can carry us, longer way. So those are the type of things that, are quite important. And just to add one more thing, is that we do understand that there's a cost involved in implementing these protocols. It is an issue that, we are looking at. And it is an issue that we ought to discuss, because the financial relief for the sector, I understand, the UIF TS program is there. And I know that the UIF commissioner is here, and I'm sure he will be able to give an update as far as whether that's going to be extended or not, or whether there's going to be a special dispensation for the tourism industry. Because, for us, just to touch on the UIF, it's quite important that, we get an extension of UIF TS program. Even if we open, we're not going to see any meaningful action in the next 6 months to sustain the number of jobs that we have in the sector. The last thing we want is to say, well, we're retrenching people, then they go to UIF, for the normal retrenchment benefits. So if we can mitigate that now, it will go a long way. So collaboratively, we have to work together. We have to make sure that in whatever we do, we consult. We are available as the TBCSA to talk. We are available to be part of any conversation. In fact, I will personally be available to talk if anyone wants to discuss. And if I have to travel for business purposes and cross the province, I will do so if there's a need to do so. Thank you.
I've been on mute. Can you believe it? My apologies, everybody. So this is going to you. Sorry, Nhlanhla, it's more of a comment than it is actually a question. We have somebody on the chat facility who has mentioned that she advances 100 students within the areas of Kokstad and actually requires the support. So we will endeavor to then link you up with her in order to see what sort of support we can then provide for that project. While I've still got you online, Chifiwa, you made mention to the health and safety protocols. The question is, when will these then be officially adopted? And how will TBCSA make sure that they're adhered to in the private sector?
Thank you very much, Tammy. The protocols are submitted, to the Department of Tourism for the department to look at. And as soon as the department is, I'm sure, sufficiently, looked at those protocols together with their colleagues, I'm sure they will make a pronouncement when it comes to that. But it's important to note that the issues around norms and standards is part of the recovery document. It means that at some point we have to formalize the norms and standards, because, as I've said, it's going to be, the trust is going to be the big thing for international and domestic tourists to travel across and stay at any facility. So for us to instill the trust, we need to make sure that the protocols that we have are implemented and are adopted to make sure that, there are countrywide protocols. So whatever the instrument that's going to be used, I'm sure the department and the minister, will be looking at that. From the implementation point of view, how are we going to monitor that, this is implemented? We're employing various, methods. One, through technology. We have launched an app to make sure that, people can do compliance, register every morning. And the next phase of that is to make sure that, those that are visiting those establishments can be able to communicate back and say, well, this establishment is not doing this, is not doing that. We're in the process of establishing the WhatsApp line where, you can easily send a WhatsApp to say this is what's going on. And of course, in a traditional way, you can send an email to do so. So those are the things that we're going to implement as we go, as the next phase. In fact, the WhatsApp line is probably going to be the next immediate phase that we're going to be implementing. That's going to help us to make sure that people are complying. We will rely on consumers that are going into those establishments. We will also work with the local municipalities. I'm already talking to a few municipalities that have called to say, how do we assist the products in our municipalities to implement these protocols? So we will work with municipalities, we will work with the provincial tourism authorities, because we all have to remember that if we don't adhere to these protocols, there is no tourism to sell. There's nothing. We might as well shut down and stay at home until we find a vaccine. So we all have to comply, and there has to be an assistance from the provincial tourism authorities to come on board and say, how do we work together with the products on the ground? Be it from the provincial government, be it from the metropolitans, municipalities that have this huge interest in tourism. We all have to work together. Otherwise, we won't have the private sector, we won't have the public sector, then there won't be tourism because we will be super spreaders. So it's something that we have to do together to make sure that we mitigate this risk.
Well, thank you for that. As you said, WhatsApp. On a lighter note, there's somebody who's saying you don't open up on LinkedIn for them to message you directly, Shafiwa. Please, can you open up your LinkedIn for people to write to you and message you directly? Now, I do see that we have the most burning question on the chat at the moment is, when will the borders be open for domestic travel and also for international? Please note that I am seeing your questions. We are going to have an opportunity for the minister and the deputy minister to answer questions later on in the conversation. So I am acknowledging that questions. Just let's get through the program of the day, and we will get to that answer further on in the program. We now move to the second panel, which we are now going to speak about financial impact within the industry, but also looking forward. I've got 5 members of the panel. I've got the Deputy Director General of Tax and Financial Sector Policy at the National Treasury, Ishmael Mumuniat. I've got the Senior General Manager of the Banking Association of South Africa, Khulekani Mate. The CEO of South Africa Insurance Association, Vivian Pearson, the UIF Commissioner, Tebogo Maruping, and the CEO of the conference company, Nina Frazian Pretorius. I will start with you, Ishmael. What is the impact on the economy from the virus, and what is the support that Treasury is offering the business community to ease and provide relief?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, no, thank you for inviting me. I think that this forum is quite important because I think, as has been said, your tourism sector has been hit harder than other sectors, obviously because of COVID, the resulting lockdown measures that's impact. But even without those measures, and I think, as many speakers have stated before me, that even if we were to lift all the restrictions currently, you'd still struggle to get people coming in. So it's going to take us a while or at the very least until the vaccine is been has reached us all, that perhaps life can return to some sort of normality, although we'll never reach the normality we're currently in. And I think precisely, because of COVID, I think we've recognized in the Treasury that this, even as we started, that this is potentially economically a disaster for not just the country, but for the world. And the impact on some sectors will be harder than others, and almost every business will be affected. And for that reason, I mean, as you know, South Africa, the minister had just completed his February budget. We had not sufficiently factored in what was going to happen on COVID. And we were already in a very tough space fiscally. We needed to not just, as you can see, flatten the curve of the infections, but we also had put out a path to flatten or as you've seen with the supplementary budget, to flatten the debt to GDP curve that we face. So, I guess with all the years of state capture and looting, we weren't in a good space. We didn't have the fiscal space that we had, say, in 2008, when you had the global financial crisis, and we actually had fiscal space to operate. This time, we started this crisis with, in an extremely vulnerable state. But despite that, I think what government did, and in particular, it was recognized that many businesses will lose their income. They're going to have liquidity problems. People are going to lose their jobs. And so a number of measures were taken on the tech side. And we did it on the tech side because we know that businesses have to make often monthly payments on PAYE and so on. And we basically gave businesses an interest-free loan to say your contributions towards PAYE, some of it you can keep as an interest-free loan. We deferred all those payments. And, those measures were announced, in fact, a few days before the lockdown even started. And then we added further measures in April linked to the employment tax incentive. We deferred certain excise payments for the alcohol and tobacco industry. So, a range of measures were taken. I think we knew that, even these measures would not certainly be nowhere near full compensation or assistance for the coming loss in income that companies were to experience. So we also, and at that stage, the issue was speed. How can we reach out to businesses quickly? So we launched the credit guarantee scheme and I should add, it was for small businesses with a turnover of 300 million rands, and working with the banks. Obviously, there's an underlying guarantee, but we said to the banks, look, normally you would turn down these applications because just on a normal business case, I guess, it would be hard for such loans to be given, and you also have provisions on reckless lending and so on that banks have to take into account, and ultimately a bank wants to be paid. And we kind of tried to shift the risk a bit and say, look, if you get down to these loans to your current customers, government has this underlying guarantee. But I should add that there is a so-called moral hazard problem. We didn't want banks to also be reckless and start lending to everyone and then have huge losses. The fiscus firstly couldn't afford it. And so the banks also agreed to take the first part of the loss. So we should bear in mind that ultimately it is their money, which they were going to lend. And yes, at some point the guarantee would kick in, but they would take the first loss. And I think that you know, as has been seen, we were hoping that many more companies would take up this sort of benefit or this loan. But for whatever reason, banks also took their own steps. They introduced certain delays in payments and so on. And to date, if you take all these measures into account, last week when we looked, it was up to about 45 billion rands. Of that, just over 13 billion rands was from this credit guarantee scheme. So nowhere near the 200 billion that the president had announced. And, you know, we've been looking at why has the take-up been so slow. And there's a number of reasons. But I think the big one that stands out is that many companies also don't want to take on more debt. And particularly when their future income stream is not certain. And I think, you know, if you take tourism or the hospitality industry, you know, or restaurants, once they've lost their income, they're not going to recover the lost income. People are not going to go to a restaurant and eat more to make up for the 2 or 3 months that restaurants lost out on their income. And I guess that, you know, many companies were also reluctant. And of course, the banks would also, as responsible lenders, would have to use their criteria. One can pose questions, were they being too conservative for this period? But bear in mind, it's their money. But, you know, we've been sitting with the banks. We've now made further adjustments. There's a second round of adjustments that have been made to try and make sure that the scope is widened, that we've removed the 300 million rand limit, or we've by just having we've revised that and put in measures like the maximum loan can be up to 100 billion rands. Because bear in mind, these are small businesses, and relax some of the conditions. I won't go into all of those conditions, but and let's see what happens. But certainly, it's unlikely that it's going to go anywhere near 100 billion. And, you know, between the 45 billion to, you know, whether it goes up another 10, 20, 30 billion, time will tell. But I think we are finding that this mechanism, like any of the mechanisms that we've introduced, are not going to be, you know, it's not going to be a silver bullet that going to assist companies. And let me say that I think that even if, and I'm certainly, I don't know, I'm not trying to preempt any announcements, but at some point even when the restrictions have been removed, and if we were to remove all of them, you're going to find that, you know, The Economist had an article saying, they had this back in the first week in May, saying, what does a 90% economy look like? Because most countries will not go back to 100%, they'll go back to 90%. And just looking at the huge implications this has for inequality, and the fact that the hit is being taken by people at the lower end of the income scale, because they're not able to work from home, as many of us are doing currently, and they take a real hit in income. And if you look at the CRAM study, for example, where up to, I think it was the end of June, you had 3 million people that estimated have lost their jobs, but 2/3 of those, 2 of the 3 million, are women. So certainly within those, you can see that there are groups that are more vulnerable and therefore are taking a bigger hit than others. So let me end by saying that, so those are the 2 schemes we have, the loan guarantee scheme and the tax measures that we've had. In fact, we've just announced that some of the deferrals, we've extended it by 2 months. But I should add that we're keenly aware that, you know, the vaccine, even if there's a vaccine by the end of the year, and I know Russia has announced a vaccine, but they've decided, it appears, to bypass testing it on 30 or 40,000 people. So I'm not sure I would try that vaccine. I want it to be fully tested and deemed to be safe by our regulators, and they will decide what's safe. But assuming there's a vaccine, even by the end of the year, you know, rolling it out to, I don't know, is it 55 million people? I'll leave that to our health experts to tell us, but it may be that it needs to be rolled out to at least 10 or 15 million people first before, as they say, the R number, the infection rate goes down sufficiently low so that we can, people feel more confident to fly and to do everything that they used to do before. And that may well go into, again, I'm just projecting from, you know, personally now, it's not an official position, but you're looking at beyond June next year. And the challenge is going to be, how will we all our businesses, how will we maintain our productive capacity? And in particular, what will that mean for the tourism sector? And let me say that as Treasury, even though we don't have money and fiscally we're in really a tight spot, I mean, we remain open to engage with the industry. And I think this forum is a fantastic forum. Firstly, to hear what's, you know, of any specific challenges that you face in tourism, and whether there are not other measures that we can look at, and we remain open to that. So we'll certainly, our team at Treasury is going to be present for the entire session today. And, you know, we hear with open ears, and certainly happy to follow up after this session. I want to apologize that I've got to leave by 10:30, but in particular, I've got Jeanette Blanche and Chris Axelson to answer any questions that are posed to the panel. They will answer those. And there are other colleagues from the Treasury, if they non-tax or non-financial sector related matters. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ismail. We're now going to turn over to the banking sector to give us an overview of the impact of coronavirus on the economy, but also the support and role that is played by the banking sector to support the business community. Over to you, Pulakan.
Good morning, Chair and Minister, fellow panelists. Thank you for the opportunity. Ismail Momoniat has covered the ground, at least much of the ground that I'd hoped to cover. So he's made life easy for me. We'll hopefully save this webinar some time. But just to start perhaps by underscoring what everybody has been saying, that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic has been devastating. The estimates of GDP contraction are wide-ranging from a kind of -7% to double digits. Measures of economic activity also show major weaknesses which are likely to persist. Just about all statistical releases paint a very, very bleak picture of falling output across sectors, almost without exception. There's been widespread closure of firms, and many are unlikely to open after the lockdown. To those of you who follow the news, some of the country's largest banks that reported recently have indicated that they expect earnings for the year to fall quite substantially due to rising debt expenses. Momo has already mentioned the results of the CRAM survey, the NIDS Coronavirus Rapid Mobile Survey, which shows that some 3 million jobs were lost in the period February to April, which indicates that as the the sort of lockdown persists, the numbers are likely to be much, much higher. And even during that period of the CREM survey, there was already reported widespread hunger, with 47% of respondents saying that their household had run out of money to buy food in April. So this is just to underscore the point that we are in really, really difficult circumstances from an economic point of view, which translates into all manner of ramifications for people, for households, etc. Banks have undertaken a number of initiatives in response. So on their own, they provided voluntary relief to individuals. So the other way of thinking about this is deferring some of the debt repayments. It's been colloquially called debt payment holidays, of something like 13 billion or thereabout, 19 billion, and some 13 billion of relief to SMEs and commercial enterprises. And of course, the loan guarantee scheme that Momo talked about, which is a national treasury scheme that is implemented by banks, that has also then put money into the system, some additional 13 billion rand. So that's the kind of activity that's happened. But I think what is important to really take into account is that this amount has been has protected, if you like, the book value that would have been at risk were these interventions not made. For individuals, the book value at risk is 392 billion rand, and for companies, some 145 billion rand is at risk. And so this intervention by banks has protected that kind of assets, if you like. These assets obviously include some 229 billion rand for home loans, 52 billion rand, which is business mortgages, 47 billion rand in asset-based finance for companies. So this is the kind of intervention that banks have made. Momo has already alluded to kind of the uptake of the scheme, the loan guarantee scheme, being less than what I think was anticipated or what was expected. So from the weeks that banks have been participating in the scheme, it's clear, and it's becoming more clear, that more debt is not the preferred solution for businesses that are in distress. I mean, taking on debt is an expression of a sort of positive outlook for your business, where you believe that by taking on more debt to expand production or as working capital, you see growth opportunities. In our environment, where your customers, a staggering number of your customers have lost jobs, and where there is no end in sight for this, it simply does not make sense to take on more debt. And I think this is borne out by the level of uptake that we are seeing of this scheme. And so loans and credit can really not replace revenues. What we do need to see is businesses starting to generate revenues that, on the basis of which they can start to project growth and then borrow against that. Incidentally, it is also against kinds of considerations that banks would consider lending. Banks would never lend to a business that has no prospect for survival. And so hence we're seeing what we're seeing. you know, Momo has said a couple of times that, well, banks have to be careful because it is their money that they're lending out. I always agree with Momo, except here, what he meant to say is that this is the customers' money that the banks are lending on. So they have to be absolutely careful about the prospect for the repayment of the funds that they advance to borrowers, because depositors are going to demand their money at any given point, and banks must be in a position to make that money available. And hence you see that even though this is guaranteed, obviously banks are taking the first loss, and they have to make sure that they do not unnecessarily make those losses become a reality. There are potential losses, but if you can prevent those losses becoming a reality, obviously the most prudent thing to do is to do the latter. And so clearly from what we are seeing is that a recovery of this sector or any other sector cannot be predicated on or be based on credit, certainly not credit only. Credit, yes, can be part of it, but I think we need to look at other measures to really drive the recovery agenda. I mean, it is a very sound recovery plan, not much to fault with it, but I think what we need to say is that if so many firms have either closed down or have delayed restarting for a myriad of reasons,
We seem to have lost Kulagani. Can you all hear me? Hi, everybody. We seem to have a technical issue with the connection with Kulagani, so we will then move on to the next speaker until he can join on again. We're now going to move on to you, Vivian Pearson. Perhaps you can just touch for us the role of the insurance industry in fighting this fight against the impact that has been made by COVID-19.
Thank you very much. I would like to say thank you very much for the Department of Tourism and the Ministers particularly for this invitation to participate today. Right, so I represent the South African Insurance Association, and that is obviously the non-life or short-term insurance industry. I think everybody has mentioned, and we cannot mention, the economic impact of COVID-19 on the, and also obviously including the resultant lockdown on the economy of South Africa, as in the rest of the world. And this has had and will continue to have a severe impact on the economy at large, as well as specifically on businesses, including smaller businesses and individuals. So we are all aware of the fact that all indications are that the economy will shrink significantly, impacting many businesses and especially smaller businesses, and unemployment will rise even further. So I think previous speakers have indicated that this will not all end once the economy is opened fully, and this is something that we will see in the near future. So I think what makes it even worse then is that the South African economy was already constrained before the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, and not growing at the rate that was required. So clearly the tourism industry has been impacted almost immediately, and as a significant contributor to the GDP of our country, as well as a provider of jobs, many jobs, this poses a risk for the South African economy. I think it's fair to say that it is in the interest of every other sector, every citizen and every business in this country that the economy is strong. And so I would really like to express support for the tourism sector recovery plan, which seeks to address restoring and elevating the tourism industry to, according to the plan, performance levels higher than pre-COVID-19, which I think is a significant ambition, and I wish the tourism sector all the best with it. So in order for this recovery to start, though, it is necessary that the broader economy is opened as soon as is safely possible, and obviously under the required health and safety protocols. So we support the call for an opening of the economy as soon as is possible, so that we can start rebuilding the economy. Bearing in mind that we also support the government's decisions to safeguard lives, the lives of South Africans as well. So that balancing act has been mentioned by previous speakers. So as all other sectors, and as Khulekani has mentioned, everybody has been impacted. The non-life insurance sector has also been impacted, but I don't think that today's discussion is a discussion about our sector. The one thing that I think is relevant to mention is the reputational damage that our sector has suffered, and still, still will be suffering for the foreseeable future. Because I think in this conversation, I cannot ignore the fact that the industry has been severely criticized by the media and the public for not responding to some business interruption claims. And this would then especially also include the tourism and hospitality industry. So this has had a very negative impact on, I think, our industry, but certainly it has had a very negative impact on the tourism and hospitality industry. I will elaborate later on this, as I think that the brief that I have received was to talk about the measures in place to assist the tourism industry. But we have to acknowledge that there is some controversy in this regard. So maybe just to touch a little bit on the role of the insurance industry. The non-life insurance industry obviously plays an important role in the economy. Insurance offers protection for assets and liabilities to assist individuals and businesses to recover from losses which they otherwise would find difficult to do. In addition, insurance is needed to access credit, which enables individuals and businesses to acquire assets and develop and grow. And as both Momo and Khulekani have mentioned, it's difficult, to sort of look at credit, further credit, in many cases, when the outlook isn't looking good for many businesses. But in normal economic circumstances, this would be an instrument that would be more attractive. So a growing economy is therefore necessary for the insurance industry to grow, and whilst a viable insurance industry, on the other hand, is required for economic growth. So this is an interesting conundrum when we do not necessarily have a growing economy. So all that I'm saying here is that it is important that we have a viable industry that is financially able to assist all its policyholders going forward. Kulkani has also mentioned that the bank's money that they use to lend is not their own. And so the insurance industry relies on their premium income and the premium income of many policyholders to then cover the losses of the few. So the premium income received, for example, by the whole insurance industry, including the reinsurers, at the end of 2019 was in the region of 109 billion rand. So that's just an indication of the size of the premium income, and then what the insurance industry then can achieve in terms of spending that money. In terms of the contributions by our industry to the COVID-19 situation or crisis, from even pre-lockdown, the insurance industry has recognized that COVID-19, the pandemic, creates a business as usual situation and contributed in many ways to assist individuals and businesses to better cope. This will include policyholders in the hospitality industry, businesses and individuals alike. And some examples are premium waivers or holidays, deferral of premium payments, proactive and reactive premium discounts, extension of grace periods, etc., for both personal lines and commercial lines policyholders. We also targeted assistance for small businesses in our own supply chain, bearing in mind that many of those, for example, panel beaters and so on, the insurance industry is really it's linked to a lot of other sectors in terms of repairs and these kind of things, and many of those were not able to open in the first stages of the lockdown. So for those businesses, the industry has given some assistance. And then obviously the industry also contributed to the solidarity and other funds and causes, in particular also protective and safety equipment for the frontline staff. So the amount so far contributed is in the region of about 1.7 billion. And I know that doesn't sound a lot, but I have indicated previously that the industry's premium income is about 109 billion rand as of per year, per annum. So in particular, the relief for the tourism industry, and this is where I'm coming back to the business interruption issue, which I think everybody in this room is well aware that it is a contentious and well published issue. In terms of the response or the perceived lack thereof, in some cases, of business interruption insurance, and this needs to be not left as an elephant in the room. So Saya acknowledge that this is a very complex matter, and it's very relevant to many businesses in the tourism industry who have suffered and are still suffering great hardships because of the lockdown restrictions on such businesses. Business interruption insurance, and I'm just mentioning this quickly, as I was also asked to explain what is covered and what is not covered. So broadly speaking, business interruption insurance can be categorized in two broad categories, and that includes standard business interruption policies, and then those that have some form of cover related to infectious or contagious diseases. So standard BI cover is normally triggered by a physical damage, for example, fire, heat, and flooding. And then there are about 3.5% of the business interruption policies that do include some cover for infectious or localized diseases with certain conditions. And usually stipulations include that such an infection should occur on the premises or in a specific radius of away from the premises, resulting in a temporary closing of the business for the reasons of disinfecting, etc. So I do need to emphasize that it is undisputable that insurers must pay valid claims, including valid business interruption claims. And so valid business interruption claims and other related claims to this industry have been paid and are being paid by insurers. Having said the above, the contract in place, of which there are various forms, will dictate how the insurance policy will respond to an event of this nature. It is therefore extremely difficult for me to respond in general, and that's why I've just given you a general idea as to how business insurance policies work, because it will differ from case to case. And it is a contractual relationship. So it's very difficult for the insurance body to speculate on specific cases. What I can share with you is that the insurance industry and especially those insurers that are relevant to this business class and the regulators, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority and the Prudential Authority, have been in constant engagements to find a common understanding of how certain policies should respond following the original guidance published by the FSCA on this matter. We must also note that this issue is not a South African issue. It is a global one and has not been resolved in any jurisdiction as far as I am aware. In view of the fact that no resolution has been reached on this particular matter, the insurance industry and the regulators have agreed that legal certainty is urgently needed to find a resolution. But we are very aware of the fact that legal processes take time, and this puts even more pressure on businesses who may have been relying on this kind of protection. And therefore, 5 of the most affected insurers proposed to the regulators in the last few weeks that they could offer interim relief measures while legal certainty is being sought. In subsequent engagements between the industry and the regulators that have already started to take place, there is a process that is being followed to consider the form of a legal process that could be followed and quickly followed to find a way forward. So I'm sure that the regulators will communicate further on this matter once there has been an agreement reached. So in the meantime, the interim relief agreed with the FSCA currently being offered is guided by the following principles, which then speaks to what I was asked to also address, and that what is the form of this relief. It has been agreed by with the FSCA, the principles, and it will differ from case to case and being dependent on reinsurer support, the financial impact, and the number of policyholders. So the interim relief should at the very least focus on those businesses most affected by the lockdown, and this would certainly include the hospitality industry as well as small businesses. The insurers will not claim back the funding provided as interim relief should the courts decide in favor of the insurers. Should the courts decide in favor of the policyholders, the interim relief provided will be deducted from the final claim settlement. So the relief will differ from insurer to insurer, and therefore I would advise affected businesses to communicate with their insurers and or through their brokers, as this relief will either be in the form of interim relief, pending legal certainty, or in the form of an offer for full and final settlement, which should also then offer reasonable value to claimants. So this is why there would have been affected businesses would have noted that there are different ways in which the insurers are now offering relief measures. Because these insurers are dealing with this matter within their own unique circumstances. So, as was noted also by the FSC, this current relief not that is being offered to policyholders is not supported by reinsurers. Reinsurers are global companies and then cannot make exceptions for one small, in South Africa's case, jurisdiction, as they have global exposure, and it would also then set a global precedent. So I do want to say that SAIA is very aware of the fact that the interim relief offered by insurers also causing some unhappiness with some policyholders who may not fall within the above mentioned guidelines and or who may deem the relief as insufficient. So I really want to emphasize that this is a voluntary interim measure only, pending legal certainty, with the purpose to provide some relief for businesses in the meantime. Legal certainty is essential, and it's in the interest of all premium paying policyholders. As I mentioned before, the premiums of all the policyholders is really the main income of insurance companies. And so it is the responsibility of insurers to remain financially sustainable and viable so that they remain in a position to pay all valid claims. I just want to make a few concluding remarks. One of them is that the insurance industry or insurance has limitations. So insurance cannot cover economic risks. Not, this is a large risk, which is something that's not necessarily insurable. So I've already mentioned the basic principle of insurance, that the premiums of the many pay for the claims of the few. So I will move on to the next point that I want to make. And that is that because we are finding that it has become quite obvious that not all events are insurable events, and pandemics can be included in this. As obviously, this is then a risk that materializes across a country and then even across the globe. Having said this, there are still, all the normal insurance covers in place, and there are many covers particular to the tourism industry, which I would have wanted to mention, but I recognize that my time is running out. I want to move on to the future. In recognition of the insurance protection gap that clearly exists with regards to cover for pandemic risks, as well as other potentially uninsurable risks, bearing in mind that these risks may in future become more relevant than it has been in the past. We have created at SAIA a think tank to consider potential solutions for such risks going forward. So this will most likely be a public-private partnership and will be a longer-term solution, but we are looking to the future, and we do not want this kind of situation, to have no solution in the future. We do have examples in South Africa where we have addressed market failures, previous market failures, together with government. An example is the creation of SASRIA, which is a state-owned insurance company that covers politically related risks. So we have some precedents of initiatives in the past that has proven successful, which we are currently considering in terms of potential future solutions for pandemic risks. So the work has already started. The whole industry is included: insurers, reinsurers, brokers, and underwriting managers. Our regulators are also participating, and we are hoping that in the near future we will be able to go to government, and specifically to our line ministry, National Treasury, to come up with a proposal which we can agree on, so that we have a better way of dealing with these kind of crises in the future. I would really thank everybody for the time that you've given me to give my input. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vivian. It's no doubt that amongst other keywords, UIF and tariffs has been quite at the top of the list. So I'm going to ask Tebogo Maruping to join me to chat about the relief programs that have been provided specifically for the tourism sector.
Thank you, Tammy, and it's good to be here. Let me greet the Minister, the Deputy Minister, the Honorable, the DG, fellow panelists, and also the people who are listening online, plus my colleagues from government that are here today. Let me start by saying, facilitator, that when the pandemic started, I must remember my time, it's 15 minutes, right? So I must finish at, yeah. Yes, when we started, one of the key things that the DG did together with the minister was to bring the Department of Employment and Labor quickly together. And out of that meeting, the outcome was a memorandum of agreement that we entered with the Tourism Council. And as a result of that agreement, it made it easier for the people in this space to be able to apply for the COVID test during that period. And we were able to resolve issues quickly. We're able to address and even have meetings where some of the items could be resolved quickly so that the tour guys could have money as quickly as possible. We also were able to share data between the parties. Part of the things that made it easier for us to resolve some of the issues was engagement at NETLEC, where we have our government, business community, and labor. And this engagement enabled us to address the offerings that we are putting on place with respect to COVID. What has been the impact to date, system? UIF, as I'm talking to you now, has finally reached the 40 billion rands mark. As I'm speaking to you, we've already spent 40 billion rands, just 40.26 million rands that we've spent on the COVID tests. We've extended the COVID tests up to the 15th of August. I was pressurized by Shifiwa, and I see now he wants to put even more pressure for me to extend this. I don't know if it will be financially feasible, but he was one of the first few individuals who put pressure on us to extend the benefit further. In terms of women, the minister did touch that this is the Women's Month. To what extent has women benefited from some of the relief schemes that are available and offered by government? 14.1 billion rands has gone towards providing relief to women. 14.1 billion rands. From the 40 billion rands spent, that constitutes about 35% that has been spent just on women, or women-owned businesses, or women. And then if I were to speak specifically to this sector, 10.8 billion rands has gone to this sector. The 14.1 is just generally to all the women in the country, but 10.8 billion rands has gone specifically to this sector. And here I'm referring to your hotels, boarding houses, your cafes, restaurants, beauty shops. These are some of the industries, some of the entities that has benefited from the COVID test. With the aim of providing the income relief to people who are sitting at home and not providing services to their employers, but understanding that we need to secure the relationship between the employer and the employee during this difficult time. Because this was not brought down by anyone. It's a natural disaster that came upon all of us. And 40 billion rands later, we are sitting here. And I'm anticipating that for July and August, we may spend about between 7 and 10 billion rands. And what I can confirm is we are starting discussions again as Shifiwa is pressing the button together with others, that maybe we need to extend this further to certain areas. But what I want to bring forth to this meeting, as I'm watching my time, is maybe we need to think about certain areas. For me, we need to look at a balancing act. How do we balance, one, that in order for this economy to make money, we need to spend money. And if you need money to spend money, that means this money has to come from somewhere. And as we know, I think Momo touched on it, before the COVID-19 hit us, we're already struggling financially as a government. So somehow we need to find mechanism to bring in money into this economy in one form or the other. At the same time, the minister touched on one interesting point. When in the beginning of the year, the surplus that was held by UIF was seen as a surplus. But when you look at what has transpired now, that surplus was the money needed for this particular rainy day. And this 40 billion rands is the one that was able to be dispersed to the economy to enable the economy to survive. We may be able to spend another 10 or 16 billion rands further. And that means one of the balancing acts that we need to bring forth is, as we're spending money, we need to be able to make sure that institutions like the UIF continue to survive. Because if UIF also collapses, it means when people lose jobs, when the economy collapses, or when certain industries are not able to survive, UIF will not be able to assist some of the individuals who lose jobs and able to give them the benefit of ordinary benefit, to be able to receive that 2,000 rands, 3,500 that you have. If you're staying in a shack and you have 3,500 rands, it goes a long way. And this is what we're able to do with COVID-19, that we were able to uplift our benefit contributions to no less than 3.5 rands during these difficult times. And the other balancing act is to stabilize and ensure that the economy becomes sustainable, which means there might be opportunities for us to provide liquidity and cash flows for some of the SMMEs that are affected here. They may have to review the product offering. I was watching a video from Singapore in how they've changed their tourism, how people come into a hotel, how they book in, how they check out, and how they use a touch screen, not touch screens. You just move your finger across. You are able to register online and apply for all your benefits online, going to a hotel without engaging a person. And in that way, that means we need to change our product offering. And then moving forward quickly, one of the instruments that is available that need to be considered by this group of people here, we've made available 104 million rands to Productivity SA. This 104 million rands is intended for turnaround solutions, where you have companies that are struggling, but they have an opportunity to turn around, that Productivity SA can assist in terms of turning around the institution, make it profitable, turning around the processes, marketing instruments, depending on the nature of the business. We'll see how this instrument can be utilized, but there's an opportunity there to turn things around. We also have an enterprise development solution that we'll be launching in the next few weeks, that I believe the engagement that we started with the DG and Shifiwa and the minister is one such platform where we can explore how this enterprise development that we'll be launching can be utilized to assist entrepreneurs in this space, to help them grow and possibly help them with cash flows and liquidity. Because in this time, one of the key requirements is for the company to have that cash flow, to be able to, a simple thing like having petrol in your car to drive people around, to take them to Rustenburg or to Nelspruit, just that petrol, just that amount to pay salaries for your people to survive for the month, just for you to flow and be able to pay your rent in that period. The other instrument that we have in place is your temporary employee relief scheme. This is now not COVID, but TERS, where you apply at CCMA and you say, CCMA, we're on the brink of a shutdown, but you have an opportunity to revive and survive. And we have a plan to turn things around. All we need right now is for a salary relief. And we are able to provide salary relief for up to 12 months. And this salary relief is generally a grant. It's not money that you must pay back to the UIF, but it's a grant. But there's certain requirements that you must meet to be able to enjoy that benefit. The other two instruments, as I'm approaching closure, is we have an instrument called short-time benefit. With short-time benefit, you are able, if you've gone back to work, but you can only afford to work for 3 days, to work for 2 days. UIF is able to close the gap for the other 3 days. Not fully, but you are able to to help you close that gap with a short-term benefit that brings a bit of cash in the pockets of your workers. What I'd also want to challenge this group is with the farming industry. The farming industry has mastered how to use our unemployment benefit. The farming industry is a seasonal process. You'd find that during off-season, they lay off their employees, and the employees come to UIF and apply for ordinary benefit. When the season is back on, these employees are reinstated and continue to work. And when it's off-season, they come to UIF, they apply for benefit, and we pay. And that enables the farming industry to survive during off and on season, off and on season. And I think even the tourism industry have that potential, that there's on and off season. During December, January, it's busy. During the Easters, it's busy. But there's quiet period in the season where it's just quiet. And we can look at how, as a collective, we can work on how we take advantage of this benefit because it's available. It's fully funded. And the last bit, Chair, as I'm closing, UIF introduced Section 5D. What Section 5D says is UIF will fund the retention of contributors into employment, and UIF will fund the re-entry of these contributors into employment. So it's two key things: is re-entry, is retention. And re-entry requires that you come with schemes that will enable people in this industry to re-enter this industry again. That where we could, as a collective or a joint venture of some sort between the department and the Department of Employment and Labor can come together and find ways to bring people back into employment or into business. Or whereas with retention is coming with instruments or schemes that can enable people that are already in employment right now to keep them in employment. I'll use a simple example. When we invested with EdCon, our key consideration there was how do we retain EdCon workers into employment? We don't want these people to lose jobs. And we injected 1.2 billion rands into EdCon. Of course, there might be views in the media that, yes, EdCon is now collapsing, EdCon didn't make it. But there was a time when EdCon, for 3 full years, EdCon survived. And then the COVID-19 hit, the pandemic hit the economy, and EdCon was affected. But at that point, EdCon was picking up and was growing. And they were shutting some stores that were not making money and redirecting these employees into certain areas where they were making money. But because of the pandemic, they could not survive beyond that. But for 3 years, more than 140,000 employees were able to pay contributions to UIF. More than 140,000 employees were able to pay tax. They're able to contribute to the livelihood of their families. So there's opportunities with Section 5D that as we collaborate and work together, we'll be able to come with schemes that could go beyond the COVID-19 test scheme and introduce other mechanisms that can retain people into employment or reintroduce them back into employment. Thank you, Ostam.
Thank you, Dewoho. We'll now move to our last panelist for this section, who is Nina Fraser-Pretorius. Nina, if you could talk to the conference industry. It has indeed been hit. There have been challenges. But as we've heard, the coronavirus is something that we're going to have to live with going forward and in the future. So how does the conference industry then prepare to open with the current environment? Please unmute yourself, Nina.
There we go. Thank you. I think the host had to unmute me. Thank you, Tami. Honourable Minister, Deputy Minister, DGs, DDGs, CEOs, General Managers, tourism colleagues and friends. All the panelists today have been speaking about the tourism sector, but I am the tourism sector. I am one of my colleagues that are in the problem. We are living the challenges that we see today. So I will be speaking from inside the kitchen, not outside the kitchen as it may. when I started looking at the invitation from the Minister's office, thank you, Minister, I think I consulted a little bit with some colleagues, and just to say my background is really business events. And within the tourism sector, we've really been fighting very long and hard to be recognized as a little bit separate from tourism, because business events is not necessarily only about the bums and seats in the aircraft, but we believe that we are about education, skills development, investment, and the legacy of tourism. We are potentially a little bit different whilst we might be using the same suppliers. And I think that's really an important aspect that I would like to convey today. A tremendous amount of work, and I'd like to recognize SACI, SITE, ASAE, who I consulted with, who is the American Society of Association Executives, ICA, who I was president of, MPI, have done a tremendous amount of work of putting a document together to say this is how we are ready, this is how we can engage, being compliant with safety and health regulations that are internationally norms and standards that we are complying with. And I'd also like to recognize the local colleagues, SACI in particular, with other industry associations who actually had set together a program, Proof of Concept, that they had in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban, where people could go to face with a limited capacity and also then virtually attend. So this is the hybrid type of meeting. And I know that it was hugely successful and very well supported. So lots of accolades to them, and thanks for the work that they've done and collaborated globally on. Many of the more clever people that have spoken before me, Tommy, have told you about all the money matters, the banking guys, the insurance people. And I have to concur that thank you very much for the loans, but it would be irresponsible and reckless of us to take up these loans. I have not, many of my colleagues haven't, because it's another liability and responsibility that we take seriously. Perhaps we're not as clever as all the economists, but our passion for this sector, and this is what we know, this is what we love, this is what we do, is really, really important to us. And you can see globally the dollars. And other countries have recognized what business tourism, not only the leisure guests are bringing, but businesses, academics, governments, and meetings are contributing to economies around the world. When I say business events, it's not incentives, it's really meetings of either smaller groups or bigger groups of people with specific focus areas meeting. The one thing I would like to highlight from this slide, and it comes from the ICA statistics report that we've done of the growth of business meetings over the last 50 years, is the importance of local stakeholders. And you'll see when we're bidding to host a big event or a intergovernmental meeting, there needs to be someone, a stakeholder, an ambassador that puts their hand up and says, come to my country, come and visit, come and meet here. And there needs to be a national association that is supported. We've not been doing that very well. We need to also recognize that associations that are not-for-profit entities are also bleeding at this point in time, and we must encourage them. It's not always about money at the end of the day. It's about the right attitude and about the right approach, because just supporting and working together to make sure that those associations are brave enough to put up their hands and say, come to my country. The other challenge that we face, and this is prior to COVID, so I think the recovery plan is lovely, let's open, let's go. We know that we will be restricted because we are it's such a global world today that we will be restricted if other destinations are open. But one of the challenges we face with this local stakeholder, and if it's not easy, is the fact that we've had a brain drain in this country, and we've spoken about it, and it's all the colors and all the rainbows and all the people have done the brain drain. And you know, the reason why that is important is if we don't have a local passionate person, a decision maker, an ambassador, that person who's on an international board to plant the seed, put their hand up and bring the bid back. We don't get those people to come to our destination. So we need to also invest in our academics, our education, our people, our surgeons, people who are the thought leaders. We can't let them go. We need to have some sort of recovery plan, some strategic messaging, and then the backup, not only talk. Sorry, chaps, we're tired of talking in meetings. I don't want to talk. I want to see action as the industry. We don't see enough of that. There's this stakeholder meeting, that stakeholder meeting. Where is the action? We need to bring those people back. This is the best country in the world. We cannot lose those brains and those academic influence. International meetings are broken down into corporate, and then the non-corporate is the intergovernmental meetings like the COP17 that we would have hosted, or the international non-governmental, those not-for-profit entities who are a collaboration of people with the same interest. And then also our national guys, we need to start with these. We need to make sure that we nurture and look after the national association of whatever it is, so that they can feel empowered, can be supported, so that those people who are in that association get elected to international boards, so that South Africa has a voice. We need to start nurturing these people. What does our sector represent? The colleague from the UIF mentioned the nails. That's fantastic. Us women, we need our nails done. Awesome. But let me tell you that business events and business tourism is not only about that. We've got technical companies that support AV, lighting, sound, creative people in advertising that bring brand identity, bring the creative ideas. We've got exhibition companies. We have got entertainers. We cover and empower and bring people together from such a large spectrum. The value add that business events brings is far greater than the leisure tourism at the end of the day. And it's really important that we take all these people with us. With the tremendous lead times that we have with international meetings, a minimum of 4-year lead to win a bid, to work on a bid, those people are in trouble. Most of our meetings for the business sector are only going to be in Q4 of 2021. Nobody's coming before then. Whatever you say, whatever you do, how are we going to make sure that we have all our stakeholders on board? We've got all the supply infrastructure to carry us there, to make sure that we are ready to do business and support what needs to be done to deliver the product at the end of the day. This is a slide to show you the ICA statistics report for 2019, 23,000 meetings happening around the world. You can read and Google the statistics report. It's readily available. We are such a small portion, but there's such a fantastic possibility and hope if we get all the components right. You will also see the breakdown of the different sectors that are there that we have to nurture and look at. And we as a country in South Africa need to decide which area we're going to focus on. We can't be everything to everyone. We have to address certain problems, be focused in our approach, and direct it at winning this type of business. The UNWTO Global Report tells us that meetings promote and support other business sectors. I've already advised this, so it's far reaching. We're really like an octopus. There's every sector is involved. We cannot operate or grow or thrive in isolation. We need other businesses. We need all the government departments to buy in. We cannot operate in isolation, and to do so would be extremely naive at the end of the day. We have to be able to bring everyone together to promote our investment. This is a slide from the international tourism growth, and you'll see the tourism growth actually surpassed the economic GDP. So it just shows you, I don't want to know what it's going to look like over COVID, because I think that line just drops down and we're going to have to start anew. But A colleague previously on the panel has said, maybe this is an opportunity. Yes, it's an opportunity. Let's reevaluate what we have. Let's look at our problems and how do we solve them to address this. You will also see that there's increasing urbanization everywhere in the world. So we need to really look at how our cities are developed. Are they safe? Is there good transport? Is there good infrastructure? Yes, I understand, with all due respect, from a political perspective, we want to take the business tourism cake and the leisure tourism cake, and we want to spread it all over South Africa. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. A long-haul business tourist who's going to come to our country is going to need to fly into a main hub. They're going to be visiting there. Potentially, if there are legacy projects or other projects they need to see an outlying areas from an agriculture or a water project or whatever it may be, that's fine. But to bring lots of people together in one area, we need to focus and we need to respect that urbanization is here and it's not going to go away. And how do we respond to that appropriately? The joint meetings industry has done a lot on the legacy of business. Our challenge as business tourism is all the clever panelists before me who have said, this is the money and these are the figures and they've got these stats. That's fantastic. One of our challenges is that we're the iceberg. You can only see the top of us, but the bottom is actually far more impactful. The infrastructure development, if we have a banking conference and someone decides to invest in transport or help communities build houses, improve water, help with agriculture development, renewable energy. Those are often things that we cannot relate directly to our meetings, but let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, they are there. Challenges before COVID, safety and security. Gender-based violence, it is shocking. It is unacceptable. Do you think other people don't read the news? Do you think when we put a bid together, they don't ask us this question, if they're going to be safe coming to our beautiful country? We have to address that. We cannot ignore it and pretend it isn't there. Engagement with stakeholders. We need to be able to speak to all the government departments, not only our Minister of Tourism. If we need science and technology, or we need the Department of Justice because we've got a Labour conference, we need to say, we're doing this bid. Can you support us? It doesn't have to be money. It needs to be your commitment and your involvement. And then it could be the university. We cannot wait for 3 months to get a letter from whichever department because there isn't continuity. These people change. We need focus and we need buy-in to make this work because this is potentially a vehicle to create jobs and bring everybody along with us. Cost effectiveness, very often we come up against the fact that, well, we are a third world destination, therefore we should be cheaper. We are not. We need to reevaluate that. SAA, they're the most expensive airfares. We need to have cheap airlift to get our delegates to our destination so they can engage, they can invest, they can do skills transfer. Rather have open access or sky deals. Those clever airline people come to the party. Minister, we need to have cheap seats to bring them. Most of our people are business class flyers anyway, so they're going to get good revenue, but we need clever solutions. We need to reinvent ourselves. Technology and infrastructure, we have to have cheaper data available because we are going to be doing virtual conference until at least February, March next year, and then we're going to have hybrid solutions. So we have to get going. Things are not ever going to be the same. The eco-statistics tell us smaller hybrid meetings, and we're going to have to respond to all of those things at the end of the day. I want to leave you with one thing, Tommy, Minister and colleagues, is that our friends in Rwanda, they are such a small baby country compared to us, but you know, they are so passionate and they had that terrible genocide. And you know, their motto is working together, having accountability and thinking big. And you know how big they've thought, and the ICA statistics, based on the criteria I shared with you, you will see that as a country, Kigali is the only place that they have a conference center. They had 32 meetings, international meetings that rotate. And if you look at the city rankings, they're just below Cape Town. You can look down the rankings and the story will be told. Why? Passion, commitment, focus, working together, the accountability. Why can it not be us, Madam Chair? I thank you. We're passionate as the industry. We are here with you. We want to work. We can make it work. We've got a fantastic product, but we need to relook at how we do things. Thank you, Minister, for the invitation. Thank you, Tommy. Thank you, colleagues, for listening.
Thank you, Nina. So we now are going to go into the Q&A. So I'm going to ask Janet to please be available in the absence of Ishmael, because he had to leave. Kulegani, be on standby. Vivian, also please be on standby. Let's start with you, Janet. There is a question about the UIF. If a company took advantage of the deferred taxes, the pay as you earn, etc., they cannot obtain a tax clearance certificate because they took the deferred tax. Has this been resolved? Is this still the case?
Tammy, if I may, we've got Chris Axelson on the panel as well, who's in our tax team. So if you don't mind, Chris, may I hand this one to you?
There we go. Thanks, I've been unmuted. Yeah, sure, thank you. That shouldn't have been the case. If you were applying for a deferral of your pay as you earn, it was a measure that was announced by the president. It was announced by the minister. You didn't need to pay over the full amount in order to be able to get a tax clearance certificate. I have checked with the colleagues at SARS, and they have confirmed that that shouldn't have been the case. So, I mean, we can, if you like, you can provide your details in the chat, and I can get some officials from SARS to contact you on this, and they can see if they can rectify, but that shouldn't be the case. And others who have used the deferral for the pay as you earn, they should be able to get their tax clearance certificate. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Kulagani, we have a question for you. We hope you are back online. Let's try. I know I can see you online. Is it possible for the banks to formulate tourism-specific products to access relief measures? Because currently the process is generic for loan uptake.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Brilliant. Sorry about earlier. I really don't know what happened. I suspect it has to do with ESCOM. Just to indicate that the current loan guarantee scheme that we're talking about is in fact a national treasury scheme that banks are simply implementing. So as Momo was saying, that it was one of the measures that the government looked at and at the time believed would be necessary to address the challenges. By its nature, it's meant to help with sort of short-term interruptions, if you like. It was designed as a 3-month measure to help companies that would have been affected in 3 months get back on their feet and run. We're now in a situation where this is prolonged for a longer period. As I indicated, and I think it was confirmed by Nina, a credit product is probably not what the industry needs. And I think we need to really think hard about how to respond to the needs of the industry. So just to respond briefly to the question then, I think National Treasury has indicated that they're open to further discussions. We have already had one refinement to the scheme. If there's a need for a further refinement to the scheme to look at the needs of the industry, I'm pretty sure that National Treasury would be open to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kulagani. Vivian, we have a question for you. Who qualifies for the insurance? You mentioned interim relief. Who qualifies for it, and how are they able to then access it? Do we have you on the line, Vivian? I see you are online.
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we go.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself, but it said I should be unmuted by the host.
No worries.
But I got it right. Okay, so in terms of the qualifying, I think I also saw another question that's related in terms of who are the 5 insurers involved. I do want to say that this was an agreement reached between the 5 insurers and the FSCA initially, and that, you know, these are the main insurers involved in this situation. Not all our members are involved in business interruption, but there may be some other members who are, you know, who will be considering the same things. So the issue here is that it depends from individual insurer to individual insurer. So as per those criteria that I mentioned, or the guidelines that were agreed with the regulator, it depends on the financial impact, the number of policies. It depends on your reinsurance support. Because these are big claims and therefore reinsurance should be kicking in. However, the reinsurers, as I mentioned, are global companies, so they have not really, you know, made that decision yet. So the different insurers who are involved and entered in or agreed to this kind of interim relief has different programs in place. So they would have then set their own criteria. So the 5 insurers that have reached these agreements, I can mention them. It's Santam, Hollard, Bright, Old Mutual Insure, and Guardrisk. So these insurers, and as I said, there may be others who were not party to this agreement, but these guidelines are out there, so they will have their own, they will make their own decisions in this regard. So the recommendation is, as I did say in my presentation, contact your insurer or your broker, because these kind of policies are quite complex and most of the businesses would probably work through a financial intermediary. So that would be the first step. Then, as I said, each insurer will have their own set of parameters, their own set of who qualifies for it. The broader guidelines just include a look at those industries, which the hospitality and tourism industry is one of them, would be most affected. In other words, they haven't been able to work at all during this period. So that is a broad general guideline. And then also smaller businesses. So those are the broader guidelines, but as I said, there will be specific guidelines per insurer, and therefore the best is to contact those insurers. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. Thank you very much, Vivian. Deboho, I hope you are still online. You seem to not be online. I'm just going to sort that out. There we go. Deboho, I've got a question, 2 questions for you, so we'll answer them one at a go. The first question for you is, I know you touched on Shafua giving you the pressure, but can tariffs be extended until the borders are open? Is this even in consideration or in the pipeline?
Thanks, Tammy. As I said earlier, we are still discussing. It's a number crunching game at this stage. I've asked the actuaries to look at the numbers and to tell us what is possible. We'll be discussing as EXCO this afternoon and again tomorrow. Possibly I'm hoping by Sunday we'll be able to make a decision on whether we can extend and how far. But right now I cannot say yes or no, but I can just tell you that yes, we are looking into it.
Okay, while I've still got you on the line, there's one more personal question. It says, if the company I was employed at has retrenched me, do I still qualify for tax payment even if I have not applied for UIF?
Hey, yeah, that's a tricky one. It depends at what point they were retrenched. If they were retrenched after, let's say hypothetically after June, that means for April and May, they qualified for COVID. But if they were retrenched before the pandemic started, that means they qualify for normal UIF benefits, which you can process and pay to them.
Well, I thank you all. Thank you so much to all the panelists that we have had in that session. We are now going to move to the next session. We need to remember that every crisis eventually does have a recovery. It's really up to us to decide how long we would like the recovery to happen. And as the saying goes, many hands make light work. So it is imperative that if we want to speed up the recovery, we need to consider collaboration. I will now be handing over to the CEO of South African Tourism, Mr. Sisa Njona, to speak to us about the tourism recovery plan and the risk-adjusted strategy.
Thank you, Tammy, and good morning to everybody. Good morning, Minister. Good morning, Deputy Ministers, and everybody else on the call as well. I will be taking you through the presentation more on the technical side, rather, of the recovery plan itself. Let me just share my screen with you. There we go. All right. I hope that is visible to just maximize the screen over here. Okay, so as I said, is that the minister has already talked about the document that is out for circulation and input to everybody. It's part of a much wider document of 120 plus pages that is out there as well. And again, there's encouragement for inputs from the entire sector in terms of it. What I'm going to be taking you through is an abridged version of that. It just highlights one or two of the key items there in terms of the consideration. And just as a start, in terms of how you should be engaging with this document, it is a recovery plan, which essentially is going to be lodged with Cabinet, as the Minister had said. This then becomes an official document of the government of South Africa that enables a whole lot of tactics and expressions of it in different formats. So what you're not going to find in the recovery plan is dates, specifics, but rather concepts that allow the dates and specifics to come thereafter. You have to appreciate that the environment is very, very fluid. And what we know today may change, in terms of next week. And we need to have that flexibility in terms of going to the detail from the perspective. So just off the bat there, we call these foundation statements, just kind of get a sense in terms of what the principles are behind it. And as been said by all the previous speakers, that South Africa is following a risk-adjusted strategy based on the levels of lockdown, not necessarily the dates. And I know, and I can absolutely sympathize and understand the frustration from the sector of wanting to have dates, because dates give you certainty, and when you need certainty, you can actually plan. Now, and that's essentially, I think, what the risk-adjusted strategy comes through from a perspective that says we can give you certainty as to when, for example, international borders open. That's at level 1, but we can't tell you when level 1 happens, because that'll depend on the epidemiological facts. I've been practicing that word for so long, but I still get it wrong, right? And that's announced by the president from time to time. Like I'm sure everyone else around the country, I'm particularly staying close. I call them rumors, but they haven't been confirmed, that the president may make some announcements soon, which will give a lot of relief basically to the sector. But what's important is that the priority and objective remains to resume operations as early as it is safe to do so, both for South Africa and as visitors. And I think that remains quite key from the perspective there. And then obviously the plan itself looks at opening this and positioning the country to compete in a global recovery market, because the key there is that we're not the only ones, who are in this pandemic state, but it's a global phenomenon there. Now, this gives you a bit of a sense in terms of how did we build up to this ultimate recovery plan. And I'm sure a lot of you also remember on the very first webinar that we came on, it was early April, and the amount of frustration, the amount of anger, the questions that were absolutely not known, rather answers not known, was really palatable across the board there. So we had 6 of these sessions where we invited different players within the industry, right from conferencing to airlines to hotel accommodation. We even had the Airbnbs and everyone else, and all of these provided platforms for all of us to engage. So this is really from a perspective in terms of the interactions that we've had with yourselves, through your various associations and everything else there. We've seen many different formats of recovery plans coming through, but in terms of consultation, in terms of engagement, this essentially becomes the key one from the perspective there. Now, this slide then kind of talks about some of the principles that the minister had landed in terms of, what are some of the key things. The first one is protecting and rejuvenating supply. That becomes quite important to make sure that at the end of this, or when the sector opens up, there is a supply to speak of, supply sector. Reigniting demand. The timing of this becomes key. You do it too early, then you don't have the impact that you have, and you do it too late, you miss out basically on the opportunity there. And then strengthening enabling capacity, capability around making sure that some of the infrastructural things, are actually being put in place from our side there. Now, on the right-hand side, it kind of gives you a bit of phrases that we can think of, right? The first one was the protective interventions and issues like TERS, items like the Tourism Relief Fund, were all injections to put in place in order to some form of semblance to hold the sector together to make sure that the supply side is protected. We are now in the second phase, managed reopening, right? Which is really saying, how then do we start to turn up or open up the tap so that the sector starts to ease up, and that's the entire economy of the country. Then phase 3 is essentially where we stretch our legs a bit, where we look at deliberate growth interventions to see how we can actually get back to where we're at and actually supersede where we're trying to go to. We still have the target, ambitious target of doubling our arrivals by 2030. So it's took another 10 years to get to the 21 million. And that essentially becomes our lodestar there. Now, I spoke of, the supply, protecting the supply side. And we did an assessment that said, well, if the sector remains closed and there's absolutely no activity, how long can the sector remain intact before it actually starts to deteriorate, right? And what you can see there, that with each month that goes by, that the sector does not operate, businesses start to drop off. At some point in time, you will run out of those free cash flows, And we've heard this earlier this morning around, which I fully subscribe to, around, you don't take debt if you have no capability or capacity to actually pay it back. You're just creating a future problem down the line. And what you're seeing basically is that in the first 4 months, or first 4 periods rather, you're seeing something like 20% of the businesses that are in tourism effectively falling off, 22% falling off. What's more interesting and scary is that if you look from period 5 to period 8, the curve becomes much steeper, because that's when a lot more businesses, I've been operating I've not been operating for 5 months, and I've now run out of cash. I either need to close shop, on a permanent basis from that perspective. So you start to model all of these in place, because if there's absolutely no intervention and you open up in, call it month 8 as an example, you'd have lost 74% of the sector. So essentially you won't have an industry to speak of, because there was actually no ability to hold it together. This slide then, just talks then around the levers that are in place. Certainly, I think I saw in one of the questions, the pandemic globally, by the way, has forced many countries around to actually hold back, especially within the travel and tourism space. Now, when the authorities close off a sector, not able to operate, there is an understanding or a duty to actually put in money into the sector, effectively to bail it out, right? This is not debt, this is not any form of credit, but essentially to saying, This is the money that we're putting into the sector so that there is no deterioration in terms of the supply side. This is to protect all of the businesses, yourselves in there, to make sure that at the right time that the government deems fit, right, in order to open up the sector, that the supply side, your businesses, do remain intact from the perspective. Now, as the gentleman from Treasury spoke of, that's the principle, that's the ideal world. However, we do know that in South Africa, we are a very, very weak fiscal environment. We simply just don't have the resources to actually put into the sector in order to hold it together. Chifio also spoke about, just gave a sense in terms of the GDP contribution of the sector in itself. And on average, it's about 25 billion rands to 30 billion rands a month in terms of the revenues generated within the sector there. Now, when I speak about what call it injection or bailout that needs to go to the sector to kind of effectively hold it together, we are speaking about a 7.7 billion rands per month that needs to go into the sector in terms of to hold it together. The challenge here, however, again, as I said, is there is no fiscal injection to come into that space. Now, the levers that exist become one of the two. You either inject money into the sector or you ease up the sector in order to generate money itself that then takes off the burden from the state to put money in. Now, when I spoke about earlier on in terms of how the tap is being opened up, we know that domestic corporate travel has started, and what that's done is kind of really pulled up the graph. So if you look at month 5 as an example, we'll be in a worse position, but because domestic corporate travel has been opened, it's kind of pushed it up probably more into the 65% range there. With the introduction of leisure tourism, that also starts to pull up effectively all the way up to international travel that says, well, we can get back to 100% in terms of the tourism sector side without any need or injection from government. So these concepts just become important in terms of, the considerations that are being made so that we know that with each week that goes through, there's pressure on the sector and businesses start to fall off on a daily basis there. Now, I'll move quite quickly on this one, but it's an expression of the previous slide as well. If you look at the top left, impact on supply survival, at note demand as an example, only about 37% of businesses are able to be held together. The balance of 63% will fall off by the wayside. But with each easing up at each stage, you start to see the stability or the blue side growing a bit more stronger. So with domestic business, yes, it does go towards easing up the sector, but is nowhere near to being effective. And you're looking at about a 53%, 47% kind of range there. Now you see the impact with domestic leisure. And by the way, domestic leisure, which will include inter-provincial travel, starts to have a lot more contribution into the sector as well. I mean, just again, we're still waiting for some figures. Speaking to some of the hoteliers and some of the airlines, they're seeing load factors literally in early teens, on average, which is in itself is a problem and is not enough to kind of lift the sector up there. Then regional, and then ultimately you get to international, which is literally right at the end. The whole sector in itself will be held together. The bottom part, Minnie, just a linking to the above, where I talked about the 7.6 billion, with no demand, and then each sector, each easing up goes, the amount gets less and less, and ultimately into international. So this is the crux, basically, of the recovery plan and considerations that are looked at in terms of the supply side as well. Now, let's look at jobs and the value, and we talk about value, the GDP that's at risk. And essentially, in the 3-year plan, right, is that a total amount of 838 billion rands was forecasted to be actually revenue generated by the sector in itself. And again, the forecast, if you take into account where we are at now and the likelihood of the opening up of the sector in the various stages, will probably only come through at about 426 billion rand in a 3-year cycle, right? So the country, SA Inc., would have lost 411 billion rands that would have been contributed by your businesses from that perspective. Now, it's important to link this up as well with the impact it has on jobs that are linked to the sector. Currently, direct employment is about 740,000 rand. So 740,000 people are employed in the sector. Currently, we are actually under risk of losing about 438,000 people within the sector in itself, just in the first year alone. It's going to take us, essentially almost a period of 3 years to get back to the level of performance that we had in 2019. That's how devastating, the whole pandemic has been. And if you cast your eye in terms of other economies around the world, we are about, in sync, probably a bit more optimistic, because even some are saying 2025 is when they'll return back to 2019 statistics there. There is going to be so much pressure that is sitting basically on the employment space. Now you can, even when the sector starts to open up, you can start to think about how social distancing will have an impact on employment. The whole thing around contactless movements, basically, of people throughout the system, hotel lobbies, buffets, etc. Those are all jobs, in the sector that are actually under risk from that perspective. There. The minister did touch on the 10-point plan, which is basically almost the meat of the recovery plan itself. As I said earlier on, you're not going to be seeing dates here, but what you're going to be seeing is the various elements that are important as a framework that start to actually let the work happen at the end there. How you need to engage with this is you need to think as a business, as a sector, as an association, right? What are some of the things that you feel are important that will actually drive South Africa, the tourism sector, forward? And it needs to land in one of the 10. If it doesn't land in one of the 10, then I think that's a great contribution to make that says, we need to include the following and in there. Now, to take you through quickly with them, and I'm now running out of time, the first one has already been touched on, this industry government recovery partnership. Or I think it was Chifiwa who actually talked earlier on that, it is yourselves, it is the private sector that delivers tourism. It is the private sector that invests, the private sector as well that actually starts to generate the income. So therefore, that partnership between government, and the private sector is important to make sure there's alignment across the board there. Number 2 talks about the tourism supply support package. And this links back to that 7.5 billion rands that I spoke of there, is that in the absence of businesses being able to trade themselves, we have to then put in some form of injection, not in the form of debt. And I must state that, right? What quasi-equity can come in, or some form of bailout that actually holds the sector together. The third one is biosecurity protocols. This basically means is that, again, I think one of the speakers talked about trust being the new currency. And we can open up the country tomorrow, but if the world does not trust that we have protocols in place, the world does not trust that South Africa is a safe destination, we actually have a problem. And the whole idea here is that you want these protocols that are in place to be adopted by the country. So these become the country standards, norms, basically. And, and that gives a lot of credence then in terms of where South Africa is going to be placed in the minds of the consumer, both domestically and also globally, is how we look at ourselves. 4 talks about the air access, and I'll look at this broadly and say mobility access. Essentially, what COVID has done is press a reset button on all international airline networks. We can't assume that the airlines that used to fly to South Africa will still exist, and we can't assume that they'll continue on the frequencies that are there. So we have to reconnect South Africa to the world as well, and that's a focus by itself to make sure that is fine. Number 5 then talks about removing the barriers to travel. This we need to look at both in terms of legacy issues that have been there. So whether we talk about the unabridged examples, or whether we talk about, the visas, e-visas, etc. We need to get all of these in place there. And I saw someone made a comment in terms of, I think it was Nina who talked about, why should we wait for so long for other departments to kind of come together and everything else there. The minister spoke about this recovery plan. Once it gets adopted by government, it becomes an official document, which gives then even, almost an engagement tool for even our minister to engage here, other colleagues, whether it's Department of Transport or Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Police, or whatever it is, basically, because then that infrastructure, or rather the process, will be set in place there. So we've got to look at items that are historic legacy that we've got to actually start to look at and make sure that we can remove them to put them in place there. Number 6 talks about the catalyzing domestic demand, and I'm encouraged to hear, I think it was the CEO of NEDLAC, to speak about mobility of South Africans getting to know their own country as well. And the reality is, and not just in South Africa, but globally, is that domestic is going to be with us for the foreseeable future and gives us an opportunity to rebuild this and kind of make sure that we can actually start to build from the inside out, as it were. And I know that a lot of you will have to look at innovative ways as to how you pivot your businesses and what adjustments that you need to make in order to become attractive to the local consumer. And price is one of the issues my team always tells me all the time. South Africa, the products are too expensive for South African demand. So maybe the focus shouldn't be on price, but rather on value, and how then do we get this value proposition to be appropriate for the market that we are looking at as well. But as I said, for the foreseeable future, we have to take care of ourselves as an economy and start to build ourselves out from the perspective. Number 7 becomes quite key, and this is now opening up to the world. Targeted global marketing program. Again, what COVID has done, it's effectively pressed a reset button as to who our key source markets are, right? Because there are so many variables that one has to consider over here. One is, how is South Africa managing or handling the pandemic itself? Becomes about how we are attractive to the rest of the world. What is happening right now is that all countries are looking at other countries and really segmenting them either into green zones, which are easy to travel to, yellow, cautionary, or red, essentially. We've got to make sure that South Africa is not in the red zone in terms of a travel advisory, because should we stay in the red zone, we could open up tomorrow again. No one will be traveling to South Africa because of all these travel advisories. Essentially, we've got to look at how we are managing the pandemic now to make sure that we are in the green zones of many countries around the world, or at least a yellow. And essentially, yellow says you can travel, but you'll be subjected to a 14-day quarantine on return to your home country, whichever that source market is. Similarly, right, you also got to look at how South Africa is also looking at other countries as well, because essentially South Africa also needs to protect its citizens and make sure that we don't import the virus in from potentially countries who have not been managing the pandemic. This is moving on a daily basis, right? And what used to take 3 months is now literally moving on a daily basis. I'm sure all of you would have seen the stance that the UK took on Spain as an example, and decided, because of the spiking numbers over there, they're immediately instituting a 14-day quarantine. And I saw, I think this morning or yesterday, they've also done the same thing to France. It's moving because people are now moving to second waves and starting to protect themselves there. So this is going to be a tricky one, but it needs to be looked at, and data is going to drive, in terms of how then we resegment the world and choose the right places there. Number 8 is the investment and market entry facilitation. The minister did speak about this one, looking at investment into the sector itself. There are areas of this country that are due for more tourism investment, both from domestically and also attracting international investment. This gives a great opportunity for transformation and product diversification. We've got a beautiful country. It's 9 beautiful different provinces, but yet the concentration still sits in very few, and we want to spread this out right across there, and maybe help out our colleagues there from Department of Labor, UIF, to also smooth out the seasonality of tourism itself. So it happens throughout the year as opposed to spikes, almost like the agricultural example that you kind of given in. But also as well, the geographical landscape becomes important to make sure that activities happen across the 9 provinces and without these big concentrations that kind of exist within how we are stacked up as a country. Number 9, again, is about regional value proposition, right? let's just, if you glance your eye as to what's happening around the world, everyone started off with domestic, and now they've kind of gone into regional. And these travel corridors or hubs that you see, and especially the concentration around Europe. And Europe is a cluster of very small countries that are just opening up trade to itself. And of course, they are in their peak season now, which is in the Northern Hemisphere. And, some were actually pressured to open up even earlier before others. But what they've done very well is that they are able to package, almost, multi-country travel, within that region. This gives us an opportunity, at least as a SADC, players. And I think the minister referred to the SADC tourism strategy to implement that so that there's flow. We can hunt as a pack in terms of SADC itself. We've got some really, really great offerings from ourselves and our neighbors that we can put together that is able to deliver some of the value there, and also have this seamless travel between the countries as well. And suddenly now we are starting to package ourselves as a SADC, 4 or 5 countries play as opposed to an independent one. Then the last one is more internally looking at within government itself. How are we stacked up as the tourism kind of different bodies within South Africa? So you've got Department of Tourism, you've got South African Tourism, and each province has got its own provincial tourism authority, and even at local level as well, you get also local tourism authorities. And I think there's some thinking that needs to be done in terms of how do we deliver effective and efficient and purpose-led support for the businesses of the tourism space, essentially. So with these 10 items, we feel that if we then, put them together in terms of the delivery basically around it, will get us to that space where we start to actually see ourselves coming back as an economy there. Sorry to throw too many numbers at you, but the other consideration that I kind of spoke about here is that if you look at our 2019 activity in terms of the sector, 273 billion rands, we are forecasting it's going to take us 3 years, if you look at the far right bar there, to get back to kind of where we're at. Chifu, did speak about, the tally to date of revenue lost, and that's that red bar. These numbers are till the end of July. So essentially it is April, May, June, July, 4 months worth of lack of activity happening over there, essentially. And what the clawback was the domestic business travel being allowed to operate did also kind of eat back into that space. And it is this 16 billion rands that you see there in that small green bar that you said has been clawed back as a direct result of the easing of the sector that we've seen. But we still have 115 billion rands that is the yellow bar that is at risk. And this is going to be determined whether this 115 changes into green or red will be determined by the actions or the inactions of the easing up of the sector from now until the end of the fiscus, which is March next year, essentially. I think that's what we're saying. We still have 115 billion rands worth of tourism activity left until March next year. However, depending on how the sector is being eased or allowed to operate again, it'll either go into the red bar as an opportunity lost or into the green bar as value preserved, essentially, from that side there. Okay. And Tammy, I'm going to stop there. I'm sure it's a mouthful for many people within the sector. We've thrown a whole lot of stuff in there. And I want to thank everybody basically for the engagement. I want to thank you for the contributions that you've made as well. And all of this becomes a summary, essentially, of the work and inputs of the sector in itself. I certainly am very confident, frustrated, yes. I tell people I've lost a lot of hair, essentially. But we've got to do the right thing in an environment where you don't have all the answers, right? And we've got to do what's best for the country. And yes, the frustrations say to open. If we open too early and we mess it up, we simply just don't have the brand value to come back again. And we'll be in one of those countries that are essentially been put off. Then it's also about timing it right. We wait too long to open, you also miss out on the important cycle. And I know the focus right now on the sector is the summer season that is coming up, as you know, the seasons are changing and the lead time required in order to get there. To give a bit of a sense, you know, the focus is again starting off with domestic, and I think we're going to see the big swing when inter-provincial travel is allowed. And the big work that needs to be done essentially from there. We've got to build the confidence of travelers out there. And it's about informing and educating South African public at large that they are able to consume tourism safely and also responsibly, and that we've got all these protocols and activities put in place to make sure that you know, that we can start to recover or regain the sector again. We know there's a lot of pent-up demand sitting over there, but we've got to be smart in terms of how we're going to do this. And essentially, again, it's about constant engagement, you know, where we get new data points every single day, build that in and make sure that we can adjust accordingly. But right now, what keeps me awake at night is making sure that South Africa's reputation, essentially to the world, you know, when we are sitting at the top 5 countries in terms of the number of positive cases, suddenly now we're in a league that we don't want to be in, right? And instinctively, countries place you on the red list. Now it's about saying how then do we, hopefully getting into the flattening of the curve and the plateau, that we start to actually coming down the list and moving towards the yellow and the green zone. Those need to be taken into account as to when we can open and everything else there. I'm going to hold it there for now, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Siso. Don't go anywhere. I've got some questions for you. Just on your thank you note, though, there's a resounding thank you to the Department of Tourism and SAT and all the other parties who put together the recovery plan. There's a constant message that's coming through on the chat line that it really makes it a practical application, a guide, so that people know how they fit in to this recovery plan and which part they play within the puzzle. So I have 2 questions for you. Let's start with the first one. On slide 7, you referred to the demand analysis. Did this take into account the market appetite and the uptake, the affordability uptake once the borders are open? Okay, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. There we go.
Thank you. So we've got to be careful, and we use the word recovery, but essentially it's not about recovering to of old, right? And the one thing essentially the team is really focused on is we obsess a lot about understanding the changing behavior of consumers out there. You know, as an example, if we relied heavily on Europeans, essentially in past the 60s and elderly, essentially, you know, to come to a lot of our high-end activities and resorts, as an example, by definition, those are the groups that are vulnerable, as an example. So therefore, we have to look then for other elements when you look at you know, the targeted audience. Is it still that age gap? Is it the lower age gap, et cetera, et cetera? I think that work is going on in the background there. The difficulty within the domestic environment is that you're also dealing with an economy that is under pressure. We essentially are in recession. A lot of people's jobs are, you know, at stake, as an example. So essentially, we've got to relook in terms of what's the opportunity of the domestic market. We essentially can't assume that is what is of old. And again, the 3 years that I speak about, returning to the 2019 levels, is about building up this confidence again and make sure that we can hit the right value proposition in terms of the audience within South Africa as well.
Okay, great. And the final question we have for you is, Namibia is allowing a select amount of international flights in the country, into their country, to test the readiness. So are we going to do the same for South Africa, or are we just going to open full force?
So these are the tactical elements that we speak of as well. And the very first item in the recovery plan talks about the industry and government engagement. This to me is going to be about engagement, with the sector itself, yourselves, to saying, how do we do this safely? Do we want to go through a pilot project, or do we want to, what are the indicators that we want to put in place in order to do that? Because a wrong decision made will impact everybody. And again, we are also observing and watching how others are responding to this. So therefore, Namibia becomes a great test case for us, within the Africa space. We also saw Kenya's gone forward and backwards again, as an example. Tanzania's kind of opened up. Senegal as well is doing something over there. So we're looking and watching all these data points to make sure that we are learning all the time and refining it is from our side. The focus, however, as I said, is that I am crossing fingers that we move from that top 5 list to a much lower one, basically, so that we've got a fighting chance when we do pull the trigger in terms of opening up the sector again.
That's it from my end with you, Sisa. Thank you so much for an informative presentation. We're now going to... Sorry?
If I may, just lastly as well.
Sure.
The document itself is open up for submissions as well. And I want to encourage everybody, please put in your submissions in there. Ultimately, this is not going to be a government plan. It needs to be a plan for all of us, essentially, that, will become the key enabler for the sector to recover and able to deliver there. Thank you.
But with having said that, Sisa, before you mute yourself, is there then a deadline for the input? Because there would need to be an end date for people to submit their input.
Yes, it is the end of business today, the 14th, I believe.
Okay, great.
So it's been available for the last 2 weeks, I think. So the end date is today.
Okay, fantastic.
No, it's tomorrow, Sisa.
Oh, sorry.
The 15th, not the 14th.
That's what you get when your boss corrects you online. Thank you.
The 15th. Thank you, Sisa. I will now come back to you, Honourable Minister. We do have 3 questions for you. And what I've done is, there were quite a lot of questions that have come through, but they really sum up to similarities. And so I've clumped them up into 3, and then I will ask them to you in that way. Let's start with the first one. Is accredited self-catering accommodation permitted to open for business at the moment?
Currently, self-catering, permitted self-catering?
They say accredited self-catering accommodation, yes.
Self-catering accommodation, we mean in the issue of homestays?
I think it's homestays,
you do have
yes.
self-catering in terms of your B&Bs. B&Bs are opened. What has been exclusively not opened have been homestays.
Okay.
But self-catering accommodation for leisure within a province, intra-province, is allowed. We're hoping, as we work towards quite a lot of submissions that we've made, that as the next round of announcement, we'll see some progress. We're hoping so. We have made inputs in terms of the next phase based on the recovery risk-adjusted approach, because it's not yet announced. I can't be able to say this is what we've placed and all that. As members of the sector knows that once we have presented, it gets processed in the NCCC, and then the president will announce. After the president will announce, the regulations will be issued, and then we will do the announcement, just breaking down in terms of the issues. But we're crossing our fingers that we'll have a tourism month with full of activities.
Okay, fantastic. The next question we have is, what preparations have been made for Meetings Africa 2021, and also all the other big conferences, the likes of Indaba? Is there a decision that these are going to be virtual, or are we waiting to see what happens with the virus? What's the direction forward?
In my discussions with the SAT board, they've already started to look at sort of a virtual processes, either hybrid or that. It's still in the testing. In terms of their processes, you note that the board will have to look at what is viable, what is something that we can do, and then present. But we are looking, for example, we are looking globally in terms of what is happening. We are noting that many of the people are starting to bring creative ways of hosting these meetings, hosting festivals. I saw one of the pictures yesterday in terms of a music festivals where they had people with the chairs, but they were able, as groups, like you go into a restaurant, sit together, but then they are able to separate from the rest of the group and still have a music festival. As we are saying, the issue of the virus, now we know there isn't anything post-COVID. We are going to have to learn to live with it. And that's why part of the recovery speaks to developing norms and standards for all subsectors, so that we can come back to life, all of us be able to participate. So once the board has finalized preparations and what they propose to the minister in terms of Meetings Africa, and together with Tourism Indaba, I will definitely communicate publicly.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Minister. The last most burning question, I know that Sisa touched on it, that people want guarantees of dates and timelines when borders are going to open. So I think it's only fair to give you an opportunity to try to answer that one.
The challenge is that, for example, I did that last time and I think I burned my fingers.
Okay.
Because from a tourism point of view, honestly, I learned the hard way at the beginning, because at the beginning of the process, we did projections. And then we said, okay, based on the projections that we have, these are the possible timelines.
Yeah.
And everybody was up in arms to say, why do you have these dates? Why do you have? And these were just guiding dates for us to say, okay, let's us estimate based on what globally is happening. That's what I'm saying. I learned the hard way and bent my fingers. Because from government point of view, from NCCC and the medical teams, the DMEC, if you listen to them properly, you obviously hear that the work is not based on dates. The work is based, that's why it's a risk-adjusted strategy. The work is based on risk. Let me give an example. If you look at globally, you found that certain countries or cities or states, even in the US, had opened fully everything. And then when they said, and then they had a surge and they had to go back and close. So based on that, because that's why no one, even globally, if you look at all the countries, they can never give you an exact date to say this is what. I noted on the continent that we've got Kenya and Tanzania announcing that this is what is going to happen. But the challenge with us is that we are the leader in terms of infections on the continent. So one of the things in building confidence in global market is to manage the pandemic. Because as I said even in my media address the other day, that you are starting to see certain countries even putting us as high risk. Now, that's why my emphasis to the Minister of Health and others to say, help us to build confidence in managing the disease, because even if we can open borders, if those countries continue to put us in the red, you know, all of us, when we had challenges of countries starting to put us in the red, specifically for crime. I think it was Nina who spoke about even the issues of gender-based violence. The minute we started getting into this with crime, we started seeing the numbers going down. When we had the challenge of xenophobia in the country, the numbers from the continent started drawing down. So even if you open, if you don't deal with those challenges, then the impact on your numbers. So it's good to have a balance in terms of having that. And I can continue to say, this is my wish as the minister. For example, I would want to have, as a Minister of Tourism, to have a tourism month with full activities. That's my wish. If my wish is going to be granted, we'll see in the coming weeks. Secondly, I would wish to see most of the tourism and the borders, international borders, being open for our inbound and outbound market, because many people are dependent on that. Before the end of the year, can it happen? Others are saying we're likely to see international markets being active in terms of cross borders, across continents. once the vaccine has been seen. That's why most of us even pay attention in terms of the development of the vaccine and the trials and everything, because we do note that that's what is going to drive our work. That's what is going to make sure that our work is sustainable. So we'll continue to share. So I'm not so sure, Tammy. I've not been able to say this is the date. I can't say that because we are not the final decider, or I'm not the final decider as the Minister of Tourism in terms of the borders. So we can continue to make submission and still appeal on behalf of our sector for the executive in the country to understand the plight of the sector like we've been doing over time.
Fantastic. That's it for you, Minister, on the questions that were really...
Just to say, Tammy, I've been following, I hope the team is actually recording quite a number of the issues that are in the chat group. Because I've seen quite a number of good suggestions. I've been reading through quite a lot of recommendations that are coming there. I would really urge the team. I hope we are not losing those issues there. I really appreciate the participation. One would want to process them properly sitting down. But thank you very much for this engagement. It has been quite fruitful. And I hope the participants have enjoyed. Thanks, Tammy.
Only a pleasure, and thank you so much, Minister. As the saying goes, there is no right time. There is just time and what you choose to do with it. I just want to let you all know that we have recorded the session and it will be available on the department's website and also on their social media pages. I thank you all my panelists, I thank the audience, but before you go off, this is the last from me, I say goodbye, but I leave you in the capable hands of the Honorable Deputy Minister, Mr. Fish Mahlalela.
Thanks very much, Program Director, the Minister of Tourism, Mamluko Ngubane, the various CEOs of the various companies, the DG of the department, the participants, ladies and gentlemen. Let me begin by requesting all of us to join in congratulating our minister as she joins other global leaders as a member of the newly established World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Sustainable Tourism. This council is tasked to promote innovative thinking to shape a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future. This is a boost not only to tourism, but to the whole country as we strive towards recovering from the economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We want to say we congratulate you, Minister, for this important task that you have been requested to join. Let me therefore firstly thank our panelists for agreeing to participate in this important platform. Your cooperation and participations are a clear indication that the tourism sector, including government, labor, and private sector, are capable and ready to work together to build the tourism sector following these devastating effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to thank you, moderator, Ms. Karimeng, for the professional way in which you guided the discussion. A special word of thanks goes to the participants, the more than 500 participants. As the minister has indicated, I was also looking at the charts, the very important and good suggestions that you were making in the chart. And it's pleasing to note that they have been recorded and they will be part of the recovery plan issues that we'll consider so that they're able to assist us to take the sector forward. We really appreciate the input that you have been making. According to the 1996 white paper on the development and promotion of tourism, South Africa's approach to tourism is government-led, private sector-driven, and community-based, and grounded in cooperation and close partnership between all stakeholders. It is on this foundation of cooperation that we are also building our recovery. We believe this approach of working together will allow us to weather the current storm. The development of tourism sector recovery plan is a further example of a high level of cooperation in the tourism sector. And we believe that the recovery plan provides a realistic roadmap to recovery. However, like the Minister Ubai has indicated or said, the recommendation outlined in the tourism sector recovery plan are not cast in stone. We therefore urge all of you as stakeholders to submit your inputs on this tourism recovery plan by the end of business tomorrow. I've seen in the chat someone was saying, no, is it possible to extend it? We don't have the luxury to extend it because we must make sure that we get ready. The sooner we get ready, so that whatsoever, whenever the president makes pronouncement, we found ourselves ready to hit the ground running. It is therefore critical that we need to have this plan being finalized. Indeed, the first sign of recovery will be when we see our workers returning in full back to work, when accommodations establishment takes booking in high volume, when restaurants operate in full, and when South Africans begins to travel. The main objectives of the recovery plan is to resume tourism operation as early as it's safe to do so, guided by the risk adjustment strategy of government. As a Department of Tourism, we are committed to work together with you to make sure that the sector recover as quickly as practically possible. While the plan is on paper, it must be a living document to which we refer and refine as we learn and innovate to rebuild the tourism sector. The road to recovery will indeed have to be transformative. I've seen in one comment in the chat was saying 70% of the industry, of the workforce, is women. And then he then asked, what is it that needs to be done more to include women? Yes, it is true that 70% it's women, but that is a workforce. And they are mostly in the junior level. We want more women to participate in the senior level, to be in charge in most of the industry. So that's why we need those women to be encouraged, to be skilled, so that they're able to be at the center of driving this recovery plan and the transformation, the agenda that we want to see happening. Throughout this process, we will have to shake up our institutions, rewrite the rules, bring the smarter ideas, and reinvent in the new skill as we market our destination differently. Because it is unavoidable that our approach will have to be different. We will have to make sure that we adhere to the health protocols and new ways of doing things. As the minister has indicated, there is no post-corona COVID-19 because it will be with us for many years. So it is critical, therefore we must adjust everything that we do in line with that. I would therefore like to encourage all our stakeholders to remain steadfast in their efforts in recovering the sector. As I conclude, I wish to quote what the minister said: if we work together, we will weather the storm. Thank you very much.